If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. What is the strangest, oddest, and most unexplained supernatural, paranormal, or otherworldly thing you've personally encountered or experienced? I can't explain what I saw. So a few nights ago, my husband and I were up really late, and we went outside to smoke a cigarette. When we got outside, I suggested we walk to the stop sign at the end of the road and then turn around and come back home. While we were on our way back home, we saw this thing. It was totally black and very short. It looked like a child. However, it was alone, and it was like 3 a.m. So I say, what the F is that? Is that a kid? And while we were both looking at it, it stepped off the road into someone's yard and just totally disappeared. It didn't go behind something. It literally just stepped off the road, and it was gone. I'm freaking baffled by this. Has anyone seen anything like this? I was visiting New Orleans with friends and staying at a house across the street from the St. Roch Cemetery. One eve I was particularly hungover and in bed early. All the lights were on, but I felt uneasy. As I was dozing off but not quite asleep, I had a vision in my mind, clear as day, of a huge, but non-threatening, black dog with a woman following behind it, walking across the room I was in, coming from the direction of the cemetery. It startled me, and I shared the experience with my friend when she came in the room for bed and with the rest of my friends the next day. We decided to look up ghost stories about the cemetery because of my experience and because we had visited the day before. Turns out St. Roch was the patron saint of dogs, and more chillingly, the most popular lore about the cemetery is that it's haunted by a big black dog. I was walking our dog in local woods with my 18-year-old son. We walked down a track. The grass and bushes on either side were around 2 feet tall. The dog was sniffing around. I was walking in front and saw a figure on the track. It was around 18 inches tall with dark hair/fur and tatty rags. I quite honestly didn't know what I was looking at. It was human-like. I didn't say a word, and it quickly ran to its left into the tall grass/bushes. Then I heard one very startled 18-year-old say, "WTF was that?" We still often mention it. He's 34 now, and still get goosebumps thinking about it. Not saying it was supernatural. A friend has said it must have been a member of woodland fairy folk. Years ago, my friends and I went backcountry camping. It was later in the season, so we were pretty sure the only people dumb enough to backcountry camp this late into the season. November in Ontario, Canada, is not a normal time to be camping. Late one night, I started hearing what I thought was a child's voice. I don't pay much attention to it, as we had been smoking a few joints in a steam tent, so maybe it was the wind or maybe pressure releasing out of the rocks we were heating up. But even later, after all those other actions were over, I was still hearing the child in the distance. I didn't say anything to the guys for fear of ridicule, so I left it. Later that night, I was up to take a piss. Across the lake, I could see a small glow of light, but I also heard that same child's voice coming from a different direction, though I couldn't determine its source. It was almost as if it were calling out to someone. The light was moving, looked as if it were waist height, and was pacing back and forth. I went back to my tent, got my flashlight, and went back to shine across the lake, but the light was gone. The next day, one buddy of mine said he saw a light across the lake too, so we ventured across to investigate. There was nothing on that side of the lake. No paths, no campgrounds, just what appeared to be some trampled areas of underbrush. Okay, we both couldn't figure out the light source, but didn't think anything of it. A few months later, we were all at a party, and we were talking about the good time we had, the steam tent, etc., and I brought up what I saw. Trying to play it off. Oh man, I think that steam tent got me so ducked up. I was hearing a child calling out all night and was seeing lights move across the lake. 2 of the other guys that were there kind of stopped and had this deadpan look on their faces. And then they went on to tell me that they heard the child's cry too, and another had seen the light, but they also didn't say anything because we thought we would be called crazy. So now all of us have heard this and are kind of freaked out. My friend's brother was going to school to be a park ranger near that area. And he was at the party and overheard us talking about the voice and light. He looked at us and was like, "Holy duck, I didn't think it was true," so we all asked him what he was on about. And apparently he says that during his course, they talked about all the old ghost stories from the area and old logging camps. And basically what we heard lines up with the ghost of Buck Hill. Which basically goes. During the Depression, a logger returns from gathering firewood to find his daughter missing. The dog had run off, and while chasing it, she vanished. The father searches with a lantern through the storm and eventually goes mad with grief. Some say his ghost continues searching, and people report seeing ghost lights and sounds of crying children. Saw a little girl riding a small vehicle across the street from my best friend's house at 8 in the morning. Bright daylight. She was glowing orange. She came out of a lightly wooded area and made a 180 right back towards the woods. I still see the image of her looking at me to this day, and it was probably 25 years ago. She looked happy. The vehicle she was riding resembled a tricycle, but it was slightly hovering over the ground. I've mentioned this to people over the years, and some people think I saw a gnome. The drawings of gnomes and the carts they ride were shockingly accurate, but it definitely looked more like a little girl. This was in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I have 2 stories I can't explain, and remembering them makes me feel a little insane. I've wondered for years if maybe something could have caused my brain to temporarily malfunction. The first story takes place in Atascadero, California, 2004-05. I was skateboarding home from a late shift at Hollywood Video when I saw a bright orange ball in the sky. It was odd enough that I stopped pushing the board and stopped to look. The ball was just sitting there, stationary. I could easily tell it wasn't a plane of any type because I kept changing positions in case maybe it seemed like it wasn't moving due to it moving directly at me, but from every spot I moved to, it stayed still. Then suddenly a smaller orange ball shot out down towards the ground and stopped. They both floated there for a few more moments and then vanished. I have absolutely no explanation. The second story still kind of spooks me. It takes place in Fullerton, California, circa 2006. My ex-wife had this sort of personality trait where she became obsessed with her fears, and these obsessions would basically change with the seasons. The fear for the time period was spiders. One night she had noticed a black widow spider under a bus stop near our apt, and she wanted to catch it. So we went back and got a jar and returned to the bus stop. My ex knelt down to catch the spider, moving very slowly and carefully because she was terrified of it, when suddenly a middle-aged Mexican man appeared, staring and smiling directly at me. This caught me off guard, since we basically lived in the middle of a bunch of empty parking lots. You could see in each direction for a while, so it was bizarre that someone could sneak up to me. Out of pure awkwardness I stumbled out, "We're just trying to catch this spider." Then I nervously laughed, and my ex-wife looked up to me and asked, "Who are you talking to?" I lifted my hand to point at the man and explain, but he was gone, nowhere to be seen. As I mentioned before, it would have been nearly impossible for him to disappear without making some sort of noise, yet I heard nothing. The guy was just gone, and I remember exactly what he looked like to this day. Okay, so I'm at my high school sports field at night with a buddy. This was circa 1983. We're walking along, and we see what looks to be a party balloon hovering near the stands. We walk over, and it's just hovering there and not moving, about 20 in the air. We decide to throw rocks at it. Upon hitting it, we hear a metallic clink. WTF, we think as we look at each other with bewilderment. It then started floating away. Slowly it made its way across a playground, staying at the same height. When it got to some trees, it levitated and flew up and over the trees and away. I see my friend every few years and bring it up. He gets mad because he wants to forget about it. Weird. One night I was on a hillside in New York, about 45 minutes east of the Finger Lakes, playing some glow disc golf at a private course my friend owns. Some of us, myself included, had been drinking and nibbling on mushrooms, nothing too crazy but enough to make us silly and to really enhance the colorful glow trails created by a glow-in-the-dark disc as it flies through the night sky. There was some downtime as the group got fresh beers, stopped for a piss, etc. I was just standing on the top of the hill looking at the night sky, and I noticed one of the clouds seemed like it was illuminated/glowing. Initially I just figured it was a spotlight shining up into the cloud and a product of my consumption, but the longer I watched it, the weirder it looked. There was no visible light source, and it seemed like the light was spinning around rather chaotically inside the entirety of the cloud. For size reference, the cloud was slightly larger than my fist when I held my hand up to the sky. The light kept silently pulsating, whirring, etc., from inside the cloud, while the rest of the sky stayed calm, dark, and mostly clear. I've never seen the aurora borealis, but to me it looked like what I think an aurora would look like, except limited to a discrete space. It wasn't steady or predictable like a spotlight, it didn't flash brilliantly like lightning, and it didn't blink like the lights on an aircraft. Kind of like if you put a tiny LED inside a translucent balloon and shook it around a bunch, or a heavenly version of one of those old fake fireplace lights that are supposed to simulate a gently glowing fire. Slight shades of blue/yellow/green throughout, but mostly just the whitish color of an illuminated cloud. After 2 or 3 minutes of staring and wondering, the light eventually fizzled out, and the cloud looked like a normal cloud again. I looked around and only saw one other guy looking at it, and fortunately he was fully sober. He's older, well-traveled, and an experienced camper and outdoorsman, and eventually he just looked back at me and said, "I've never seen anything like that before, that was wild." I still think about it pretty regularly. when my husband and I had to take a long way home because the roads were flooded. They do that seasonally, so we have designated routes, but they're all residential-ish. This is Texas, so there are farms sprinkled here and there. We have this wicked S-curve that wraps around a longhorn farm but ends on a residential road. We just get onto the residential road and see a massive, bright white rabbit hopping along the side of it. The moon is full, so I chalk that up to why it is so striking. It's moving super rabbit-like and kind of quick. Right as I'm thinking to myself, man, that's a huge rabbit. Maybe it's a hare? But we really don't have hair in these parts. It turned its head, and all of a sudden, it's a bald, naked man on all fours. I can see a grin on the profile of his face, looking over his shoulder at us. Then it hops behind a crepe myrtle tree, then behind a brick mailbox, and it was gone. We looked at each other, and our silence was loud. I have 2 instances where solid objects have moved on their own right in front of my eyes. In my bedroom, I have this lightweight wood carving of a Buddha face. It is about 10 inches in height. This mask is on top of a bookshelf that is about 3 feet high. One day, I am standing next to the shelf grabbing something, and this Buddha mask levitates from the back of the shelf to the edge of the shelf and then gently down to the floor, where I had some clothes lying around. I stood frozen and not believing my eyes. I was not on drugs or drunk, nor was I under stress, so I cannot explain why this object moved by itself. I picked up the wooden carving, looked at it, and looked around. Nothing could have made it move. Another time, I was severely depressed and crying, fed up with my life situation. I am standing by the dining table about 4 feet from the kitchen. From there I can clearly see the pile of dishes drying on the countertop. As I am crying, I see this large, heavy clear glass bowl that was drying on top of the dishes lifted up, then moved forward, and land crashing on the ceramic tile floor. In shock, I go into the kitchen to look at the pile of broken glass that I now have to clean up. There was no one at home, and there's no way anyone could have moved that. The scary thing is that as I am picking up the bigger pieces to throw out, I feel this urge to press one of the jagged pieces against my forearm. As I am doing that, I hear this voice say, "It can be so easy to just go and be done with this, you can leave now." At that moment I froze. I had to force myself to move that piece I was holding away from my arm and tell whatever it was to buzz off. My ex-fiancée and I went camping in a place called Red River Gorge in KY. The sky was completely overcast, and the clouds felt so close you could throw a rock at them. We had just got the fire going when the clouds started parting above us. I said, "Wow, look, you can see the stars so clearly." As the clouds kept parting, a bright white light slowly passed overhead, and then another, and then another. It was a ship, probably a few football fields long, and way up in the sky, there were 2 more ships, or 1 boomerang, flying in the same direction. It looked like an arrow. There was 1 separate light coasting through as well. 0 sound. We assumed it took about 20 minutes to pass over us, and then the clouds closed up. Like the front and back end of the wake produced by a boat if you were looking up at it. The occurrence was 19 years ago. I didn't have a cell phone yet. Only in the last year have I started thinking that it's very possible we were abducted. I had 2 very strange experiences within 2 months of the sighting, one being a shadow figure that I thought was an intruder and chased with a bat only to find no one there. My dad once saw a tall dark figure with a cowboy hat walk from his room toward our room down a straight hallway. And jumped into our attic, and my stepbrother was curious and climbed in the attic to see something. The dude jumped in the attic in the dark and saw what looked like cat eyes, but his eyes were more spread apart. Dad gave me a flashlight and told me to go into the attic to confirm. We flashed the light at it, and the thing was located right above my closet. Had goosebumps, and bro wanted to crawl towards whatever it was. Weirdly, the flashlight didn't shine bright enough to see it, but eyes shined like a cat's eyes. Jumped down and just wondered what the heck it was. My dad saw this figure throughout his life, maybe 7 times until he passed away at 49 years old. I just wondered if this dark, tall cowboy figure ever symbolized anything. Our house was built by my grandparents and, I believe, great-grandparents. So it's old. Shadow people are common for my mom. She says that it's our family watching over her. And when I say watching over, I mean watching over her. They loom over her and around her room, staring. Ever since she started to sage the house, all we get are whispers from my aunt who died this year. I know this is her. I've heard her call me by a nickname, and my mom has not said anything about shadow people. This aunt was also into these types of things, though not like me. She did say she and my mom and another sister saw a UFO over this house when they were younger. They stood there staring up at it. She also had a piece of metal in her foot, but she could not explain how it got there. Her room is admittedly my least favorite to sleep in at night. I've had nightmares of an alien at the window multiple times with her in the dream as well. I hate windows. I got a story. Summer 2016, and my buddy and I decide to go on a mountain trip. We're broke, but I want to get some hiking in, so instead of a hotel, I talk him into us taking a short hike to the top and sleeping up there. It was a short trail. This was western North Carolina, Looking Glass Rock. The top of it is just a rounded rock top, so I knew we'd have the stars out over us. It'd be pretty. Anyways, we get up there and unload our sleeping bags. It's a full moon, and the stars are out. It didn't even feel that dark. We stayed up talking and bullshitting and finally we're winding down. I'm just taking in the stars when I notice these 3 stars by the moon. And I think to myself that these 3 points form a perfect isosceles triangle. I'm not an expert in constellations, but I notice it. Anyways, I'm in my own head and not paying attention to anything when all of a sudden I notice one of the stars start to move. It now has my full attention. I saw these 3 stars sitting there, and not 10 to 15 minutes later, one was moving. It is doing this wiggle back and forth and then slowly descending down, away from the other 2. I'm just sitting there watching it as it keeps meandering back and forth, with no real discernible pattern. Eventually it starts fading, and even when the light goes out, for a second I can still see the object against the bright night. Now, my buddy I'm with is a little weird. He believes in all kinds of high strangeness stuff. And I'm interested in it too, but not like he is. And I'm tired, I don't want to set him off. 5 minutes later, he speaks up. Dog, I wasn't going to say anything, but you won't believe what I just saw. I told him that I saw something too, we had both seen it. It was weird that it sat there for so long before it started moving. I don't know what I saw, but I've thought about it for a long time. My experience was seeing a pyramid craft with my GF on our way home from a date. We were driving north from the city to central Michigan. Now, I've driven these highways most of my life. I know the interstate highways don't have light fixtures that light up the highways like the inner city ones do. It was around 11 p.m., so it was as dark as it gets, and the moon wasn't very bright that night. Coming around a bend, I caught something sitting above us about 500 feet to the left. I get my GF's attention to confirm she sees it too. We both go back and forth on what it could be. As we keep our eyes on it, I take the next exit to turn around and follow it as much as we can. As we're crossing the bridge to get on the on-ramp that takes us back towards it, she and I both get a good look at it from the side. It's shaped like a pyramid exactly like this, with 3 balls of light on the corners at the bottom of the craft and none on top. As we get on the off-ramp to get closer, it starts to slowly move over the highway towards the tree line. It cuts right across both lanes and towards the trees, where it slowly and steadily goes out of sight. We talked about it the rest of the night and tried to look up what it could have been, but no man-made craft matched the style. We drove back the next day during daylight to confirm there wasn't anything that it could have been. Nothing but tree lines and a far-off neighborhood in the entire area. Just trees and highway. It always stuck with me, and the shape is burned into my head. Wonder if we'll ever see confirmation of these things in our lifetime. When I was a little girl, 1970s, living in the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia with my mother, father, and brother, who was 1 year younger than me, we lived with my grandmother in the old family homestead farmhouse. It still didn't have indoor plumbing at the time. That meant we had to go use an outhouse, which was across a decent-sized yard and just inside the thick woods. The entire property was surrounded by dense forest, and we lived at least a mile from any other homes in the area. The area as a whole in that part of West Virginia was still very wild and remains that way today. My brother and I were afraid to go out to the outhouse by ourselves at night in the pitch dark. It was so dark where we lived at night that you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face if there wasn't enough moonlight or starlight. Anyway, on this particular night, our mother took us to the outhouse to go to the bathroom before going to bed that night. I went first and then stood beside my mother as my brother went in to do his business. As we were standing there, we started to hear these extremely loud whooping noises coming from the woods a very short distance from us. But that's not the scariest part. Right after that, we started hearing whooping calls from several other locations around the property calling back. It was really loud and unlike anything we had ever heard in our entire lives. It was terrifying. If I hadn't already gone to the bathroom a few minutes before that, I probably would have peed my pants. My mom immediately dropped the flashlight and took off, running back to the house, and I ran after her, leaving my poor brother in the outhouse by himself. I was calling after my mom that we had left my brother and we needed to go back for him, but she ran into the house. We heard the whooping noises for another minute or so, and my brother came running out of the dark and onto the porch yelling and crying at my mom for leaving him. That was the only time I ever heard that noise, and it gave me nightmares and made me afraid to go outside in the dark for months. I'm convinced it was Bigfoot because that was not any kind of noise that I know of any animal to make. I think there were several in the area. Before that happened, I used to walk back into the woods by myself as a little girl and just explore. We could get away with a lot more back then than today. I had a favorite tree that I would lie under deep in the woods. I would just lie there looking up at the branches, leaves, and sky, watching the little critters scurry about. One day as I was lying there, the hair started standing up on the back of my neck and arms, and I rolled over to look around to see if something was there. I immediately felt like I was being watched and in danger, but I didn't know why. There was a clearing about 50 feet from the tree, and I looked into it and saw a big, dark figure move from behind a large tree and then disappear deeper into the woods. It scared me so bad that I immediately bolted up and started sprinting through the woods with branches hitting me in the face and down logs tripping me up until I reached our home. I don't think I ever ran so fast in my entire life as I did then. I dared not look behind me to see if anything was following me. I never told anyone about it because I didn't want my parents to forbid me to explore anymore or for them to accuse me of making it up. It wasn't until I was in my 40s that my dad and I reminisced about the old property, during which I shared my experiences with him and specified the location where they occurred. Shockingly, he said that he had been hunting in that area and saw something as well during that time frame. He didn't say anything either about it at the time. All I know is that there was definitely something in those woods. I was sitting down at a riverbank a few years ago doing some night fishing. Saw a light coming down the river and thought it was the barge that always comes through, so I didn't really think twice until the light got closer and there were no waves. I noticed how incredibly slow it seemed to be moving, and I realized it was in the sky, not the water. I couldn't look away until it passed over my head, making no noise whatsoever, and my jaw dropped. I just watched it go over my head and down the river. I know it was real because I was uncharacteristically sober that night, and it was very low in the sky. Smooth, pill-shaped, with a strip of lights on the bottom, and absolutely dead silent. I could still hear the frogs and fish jumping while I was under it. I had never heard of anything like it until people started describing the tic-tacs, but this was around 06 to 07, so I had no reference when I ran up the hill to see if anyone else had seen it. Of course they hadn't, and no one believed me, but I know what I saw. My experience is very strange, and to this day, I still don't know what to make of it. The university that I had attended had a long history of paranormal activity, so much so that several paranormal television shows wanted to shoot an episode there. But the university always denied these requests, most likely out of fear of negative press. In my sophomore year, I was with 3 friends at the soccer field, which was isolated from the rest of campus and still being built. Due to the fact that the soccer field was being built, it was on the precipice of a wooded area that would soon be torn down to accommodate it. It was around 2 a.m., and we were smoking cigarettes and chatting when the wind started to really pick up with really heavy gusts of wind. As the wind whipped by us, we could hear that high-pitched sound of the wind whistling. However, after the 3rd consecutive time, the sound of the wind whistling changed, and we thought that it sounded like a dying animal. This high-pitched sound that was similar to a dying animal continued for a bit, and then it transformed again into what almost sounded like a guttural human scream that was too high-pitched to be human. The scream repeated 3 to 4 times, and each time it sounded like it was getting closer. At that point, we thought that the source of the sound had to be an animal of some sort. After the final scream, the wind completely stopped, and the atmosphere felt entirely silent and almost thick. Then, coming from the woods, we heard a child's giggle very clearly, which sounded relatively close to us and almost menacing. Needless to say, at this point we completely freaked out and ran back to our dorms. In hindsight, I wish I had the balls to stay there and see what would have happened. For years, my friends and I never spoke about the incident, but then I heard a podcast about the Enfield horror, which featured similar strange phenomena, including the child's giggle. When I brought it up to my 3 friends recently, they all recalled it, and one of my friends noticeably got the chills upon remembering it. Oddly enough, months after our experience, a mass Irish grave was discovered by builders in the area that the soccer field was being built on. I still don't know what to make of this experience. Strange experience last night, not sure what it was. Last night I had one of the weirdest experiences of my life, and I'm still thinking about it. I recently started listening to stories about real scary encounters. I love paranormal stuff and genuinely believe it exists, but even though I'm brave, I still get scared sometimes. That night, I couldn't sleep and kept replaying some of the stories in my head. For no reason at all, I felt scared. Around 9:30 p.m., I put my phone on charge, turned off the lights, and lay in bed. I'm an overthinker, so my mind was jumping between random thoughts and the stories I'd read. Normally, I fall asleep easily, but that night I just couldn't. I pulled the blanket over myself because I was nervous even looking around my room. It got hot and stuffy, and I had trouble breathing, so I left a small opening. Then something strange started happening. Out of nowhere, my body began moving on its own. I started doing random hand movements and dance moves while lying in bed. I'm a huge Cat's Eye fan, an icon, so I know the dances, but I would rather not be doing them. I just wanted to sleep. It didn't feel like me doing it. Something inside me just wouldn't stop. After 5 to 10 minutes, I stopped, went back under the blanket, and tried to calm down. About 20 minutes later, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just cat's eye moves, it was other dances too, like spaghetti and poker face. I was tired, I wanted to sleep, but my body kept moving on its own. Then, I started hearing a soft, whistling sound. It was faint but audible. It lasted a few seconds, stopped, started again, and then completely stopped. I was awake for 2 hours, and then, only somehow, I fell asleep. The whole night felt off, and I've never experienced anything like it before. The weirdest part? It didn't feel like my mind was tricking me or that I was hallucinating. It felt real, like something was actually there, influencing me in some way. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Do you have any ideas what it could have been? Thanks for listening. When I was a teenager, I lived in a house that backed onto some woods. This would have been between 2001 and 2006. The things that took place happened between 2004 and 2006. My best friend lived across the woods, so we walked through them almost daily. On the way to school one day, my friend said that last night he was walking with another friend, and this weird animal attacked them. He said it was like a monkey with no face and that it scratched him. He showed me the scratch marks. He also said when they ran off, it chased them and kept up with them, but once they got to the edge of the woods, it didn't follow and just watched them once they got back to the street. Of course, even though he showed me the scratches, I didn't believe him and laughed at him for being a shithead. Roll on to a few weeks later, and I'm walking home from another friend's house. It's dark, and so I decided to walk home through the streets instead of through the woods. The last street before mine passes by the woods, and there is also a lake further down from the path by my house. I can hear all of the ducks going mental, and I thought, what the hell is up with them? Then, the trees that are beside me at the edge of the street start to shake. It wasn't windy. It was summer, and the air was still. I couldn't see anything in the trees, but it freaked me out, especially after hearing the ducks quacking like I'd never heard before. I started to run. When I was a teenager, I was on the athletics team, and I had won medals for being the fastest 100-meter sprinter in my age group for the city. However, whatever was in the trees kept pace with me. I was running on the street, it was keeping up through the trees. It was then that I believed my best friend. We decided that we would go and have a look in the daytime to see if we could find any evidence of whatever it was. We never found anything. Months passed, and we never had an encounter again. Life moved on, we had left school, and we had forgotten about it. We went camping with some of our other friends over a year later. We weren't in the same woods, we were in a country park about 5 miles up the road. One of our friends started to feel unwell, and so he rang his mom to come and fetch him. When his mom arrived, we were talking for a bit, and then before she left, she decided to tell us a ghost story, in the spirit, punny, of camping. She started off by saying it was a true story, which we laughed off. She said she used to work in a hotel and didn't finish until really late. One of her colleagues had gotten a taxi home, and they drove along the road that passes not only the woods but also the country park. She said it was about 1 a.m., and there were no other cars along the road. She said as they were driving along, a creature, which she could only describe as some sort of monkey, ran across the road and clambered over the car. Her colleague and the taxi driver were so frightened that when he dropped her off, he went into her house with her to calm down, and they rang the police. My best friends and my faces dropped. We still stayed at the campsite, but we were on edge all night. Nothing happened, and to this day I've never seen anything more or heard of anything else happening. I have a few stories. 1. The ghost. I was about 16, visiting my grandma in Minnesota for the summer. She lives in a very old house, and she told me once that she was convinced it was haunted. During my stay there was only one incident, but I can't explain it. I was sitting in my room playing video games, and something in the game pissed me off, so I yelled, "Duck." At that moment, a bottle of cologne I had flew off my dresser and hit the wall inches from me. I just kind of sat there staring at it, thinking, did that really just happen? 2. The red ball. My family and I were visiting my aunt, and we had driven a long way to get there. I was really tired when we arrived, so I asked if there was a place I could take a nap. They showed me to a guest room, in which I quickly fell asleep, sort of. It was like a weird half-sleep. Anyways, I dreamed that I left my body and could see myself sleeping in that bed. I realized I could float through the walls, which made me wonder if I could float up to the roof of the house. I did, and while up there I saw some sort of red rubber ball in the gutters. I told them about my dream that night. A couple of months later my aunt calls my dad to tell him that while cleaning the gutters, Bob found a red ball. Some neighborhood kid must have gotten it stuck up there. Weird. 3 years ago, July 2022, I was at a meditation retreat in the hills in eastern Tennessee. Near sunset, we broke for the day to wander the property in silent meditation. We all split up and went our own ways. I walked up to the main area, where there is a deck with some tables and chairs overlooking this beautiful green Tennessee landscape. I look up at the sky, and I see this long, almost cylindrical shape, but it was like it was made of a bunch of balls. Not separate but more like a cylinder of balls, if that makes sense. Think of a bean pod. Completely silent. From what I could tell, it was about the size of a fuselage of a 747. It floated slowly and steadily from a southward direction directly in front of me, off towards the east into the darkness until I could no longer see it anymore. I had been a UFO believer even before that incident because I had seen strange lights in the sky during my time living in Arizona, where there was very little light pollution. Around November 2009, I saw a very bright shooting star coming from the north. Split into two separate lights still traveling parallel. Then the two lights rejoined and continued out of sight toward the southern horizon. But I always remained a bit skeptical about what I had seen. Maybe it was some sort of atmospheric reflection or something? After that I began watching the sky regularly at night. I would also very often see stars that would turn on briefly, then turn off. Sometimes they'd do it a few times. Sometimes just once, then gone. What I saw could have been some phenomenon I just didn't understand, but it was certainly strange. But after the thing in Tennessee, I'm 100% a believer now. I'm a very phone-addicted person, and I literally always have my phone on me, and it's always charged. I'm a bit compulsive about it. This happened to me within the first 15 minutes of the only 4 hours I had spent without a phone within reach in years. And we were all several acres apart in a heavily forested area, so there was no one around to shout, "Do you see that?" 2. We've always had odd things happen in our house, but since my husband died, the activity has amped up. My granddaughters came to visit for a couple of weeks, and the morning they had to leave, they couldn't find their medication. We searched and searched but couldn't find the stuff anywhere. I told them I would send the medications to them after I came back home. We were going to be late since we had to drive a distance to meet their mom. As I was locking up the house, UPS delivered my Amazon order, my subscribe and save monthly order. It was a huge box, but we were running late, so I said, "Screw it, I'll take it in when I get home." I have a large dog prowling the yard, so I felt pretty sure the box would be safe. When I got back home, I was sad from leaving my granddaughters, but I knew I needed to find their medication. I had a purpose. Well, I toured the house from one end to the other. I look in places I didn't know I had. Sweaty and exhausted, I collapsed on the sofa and then happened to see the Amazon box still on the porch. Sighing, I dragged it in the house, got the scissors, and opened the box. The Amazon workers had crammed it jam-packed. I carefully took everything out and set the items on the couch beside me, then thought, I might as well tear the box up and put it in the trash. When I lifted the box, the brown paper on the bottom shifted, and I frowned. There was a lump. Did I miss something? I removed the paper, and there in the bottom of the Amazon box was a plastic Ziploc bag that held my granddaughter's medications. From a sealed Amazon box. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. But then I laughed and said aloud, "You just had to play one more prank on your babies, didn't you?" Speaking to my dead husband. In my mind, I could hear a soft chuckle. He always did love a good prank. This is one of the strangest experiences I had. Once a few or several years past, I was sleeping in my bedroom in my family home, as I had a long holiday. Once I woke up, during the late morning, and after using the bathroom and getting dressed, I went to the living room area, yet I saw no one there, though it was almost afternoon by then. So I continued forward and saw the door to my parents' bedroom slightly open. I stepped in, and their bedroom is pretty large. At the very end of it, like 20 feet away, near some tall wooden cabinets, I saw my mother standing there, just staring at me. And for some reason, she was all dressed up to go out. So I said, "Good morning, Mom. Are you going out somewhere?" Yet she just stood there, quietly staring at me. So again I repeated, "Good morning, Mom." Yet she just stood there, completely still, her eyes still fixed on me. Then I said, "Mom. Good morning." And here from the dressing room, just several yards away from where I stood, I could hear my mother's voice saying, "Yes. Good morning. I'm changing. How many times are you going to say good morning? Heard you the first time." Here I stood stricken with horror as I realized what was standing there was not my mother, and I had no idea what it was, as it just stood there staring at me. I said a few prayers, and in that instant the image began to dissolve into some strange black smoke that just dissipated and quickly dissolved and disappeared into the surroundings. Then just a few seconds later, I saw my mother stepping out of her dressing room, yet I didn't tell her what I saw, as she gets pretty unsettled by such matters, so I decided just not to tell her, as she may refuse to keep sleeping in her bedroom. I've had many experiences, but here are a couple that stand out to me the most. My mother and I saw a ghost of a little boy in our house multiple times. We never saw his face directly, though. Every time we saw him, he was hiding behind something, such as the foot of the bed, the island in the kitchen, or the couch, and he would duck behind whatever he was near when we noticed him. I could tell he was very young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, and his hair was a thick, wavy, mousy brown color. He never scared my mother or me when we saw him. We think he was just lost and scared and felt comfortable at our house because there were 5 kids in it, including myself. The second one is when one night I was about to fall asleep in my room, and I started hearing a scratching noise coming from under my bed. I thought it might have been my cat or something, so I reached my arm over the edge of my bed, and normally my cat would come up and sniff me or something, but nothing happened. I was weirded out but was so tired I brushed it off and tried to go back to sleep. About 5 minutes after that, I was woken up by the entire bed vibrating/shaking. I practically jumped from my bed into the hallway and ran into my parents' room. I had a room by myself at the time, and my other siblings and parents had been asleep for some time already, so I know it wasn't any of them trying to prank me or anything. The third experience I will share for now involves an entity that was seen and experienced by my mom, dad, 2 sisters, and me. My sisters and I all experienced this while we were in the shower. It was a very tall, skinny, and dark shadow figure. We all saw it slowly walk past the crack where the shower curtain opens and across the rest of the curtain until it disappeared. I saw it 2 or 3 times, and I remember being terrified and feeling an insane amount of dread. The time my mom and dad saw it was when they were about to go to bed. My dad was standing in the doorway of their bedroom, and my mom was standing opposite to him in the hallway. My mom noticed the figure, and before she said anything, my dad stopped talking and asked my mom if something was behind him, and she said yes. My dad was never a believer in ghosts or anything like that, and now he's absolutely freaked out by anything paranormal related. I don't know if anyone has read this far, but I thought it would be cool to share these experiences. These are just a fraction of the things I've experienced while my childhood home was haunted. Unexplained encounter. My girlfriend and I arrived at the Myrtle Beach State Park around 8:30 p.m. to eat dinner, but my girlfriend had to use the bathroom first. I stayed at my vehicle gathering everything we were going to need, and once I finished, I waited and watched for my girlfriend to come out. After a while I got a little worried because it was nighttime and kind of dark near the bathroom area, so I headed that way with my flashlight. As I approached the bathroom building, I noticed my girlfriend standing behind a large bush, playfully trying to hide from me. I shined the flashlight at her, but she was only visible from the neck down because of the bush she was hiding behind, and as I walked closer, I was telling her that I saw her and that she shouldn't hide because I had already seen her, but she continued to go around the bush in my opposite direction. I go to the other side of the bush and don't see her, so I think she's still playing around and went back to the other side. I turn around and go back around the bush again, but to my surprise, I see her coming out of the bathroom, and she asks me what I'm doing. I asked if she was messing with me and hiding, and she said no. I asked her, "How did you go around the whole bush without me seeing you go to the bathroom?" And she said she didn't. She was in the bathroom the whole time and never tried to hide from me. I've looked it up, and many say it's stress or sleep-deprived hallucinations, but I wasn't really any of that at all. I'm healthy overall and have never experienced anything like this. What could it be? When I started a business and money was tight, I moved to my mother's farm for about 18 months to live in a couple of outbuildings rent-free. It was primitive living in the Canadian prairies that stripped me of any luxuries and most comforts, but I cherished my time in the countryside. It's hard to describe, but there are many weird things about this property that I discovered. My mother saw what looked like a Sasquatch walking across the field through a window in the house and managed to only get a brief video. I walked out there and found these impossibly large footprints in the snow with a 4-foot stride and individual toe imprints. The next winter, I found the same footprints in the woods at the back of the property while snowshoeing. My toilet was an outhouse outside that I had to walk to after dark daily. We frequently had auroras and could see the Milky Way on clear nights, so I often paused to survey the skies. It seemed like about once a week I'd see stars behaving in ways they shouldn't. Moving and pivoting, vanishing and reappearing, taking 90-degree turns, joining up in formation, and speeding off at impossible speeds. It just became the norm. My little brother was walking through the trails in the backwoods when he heard his name called from the tree line in a woman's voice. He ran back to the house and wouldn't go back there again for months. Then there was the banging on my building windows after dark. Once, a window right next to me was hit so hard the entire building shook. The sound it made was so impossibly loud I had to cover my ears. It sounded like all the windows in the building shattered all at once. My cat scattered to unseen places. I had recently ended in bad relationship and immediately dove to lock the door, thinking he had found me, shutting all the lights off. But when I peeked out the curtain, I saw nothing there, no massive bird or anything like that, and there wasn't a scratch on the window. There was a cat toy that belonged to my rabbit that had recently passed. That was one of those cats. It lights up balls that turn on when they've been moved. The day after he passed, it started lighting up on its own for no reason. Usually in sequences of 3 times. It was on a blanket in a basket, and I tested this by jumping around next to it, but this wouldn't set it off. I'm a spiritually open person, so I thought maybe it was my rabbit. I started saying hi Rupert whenever it came on, which was always in the evenings while I was watching TV, and it became nightly, never earlier in the day. Eventually, the device started activating dozens of times after I had spoken to it. It happened so much one night that I got really afraid and felt this had nothing to do with my rabbit, so I told whatever was there to duck off while I smudged the place. It never went off on its own again after that. Lastly, there were the footsteps I'd hear on the little deck outside my building. Always after dark. Sounded like heavy boots and 100% human, just pacing back and forth out there. The property had cameras, so I'd check them and see no one out there while the footsteps continued. A couple of times, I threw the door open as quickly as I could during the sounds, and it just stopped completely with no sign of anyone. I have no idea what's going on with that place. Easter Sunday. My mom messed with me and told me that he didn't come, and at that point I was young and still believed in Santa, the Easter Bunny, etc. I ran upstairs bawling and sat in my bed, which was in the corner opposite my bedroom door, so I had a clear view into a circular opening that contained doors to all our upstairs rooms. As I was sitting there crying, I saw a shadow outline of someone walking from my brother's room to our bathroom. I could clearly see it was facing toward the bathroom. These rooms were directly across from each other, and the path it took was perpendicular to my vision. I immediately stopped crying and held my breath and just watched as this shadow disappeared from my view and went into the bathroom. I was alone upstairs and was too afraid to yell, so I just sat there silent, breath held, and waited for my mom or someone to come upstairs. After a minute or so, the shadow figure reappeared and, from the bathroom, was walking back toward my brother's room but stopped halfway there, right in the middle of my doorway. I could tell it wasn't facing me, but then it turned, and the outline looked to be of someone either facing me or away from me, rather than me seeing the side outline of someone. It just stood there, and I was dead still. After about 15 seconds, the figure started charging at me, so I hopped under the covers and began screaming. My blanket had small holes all over, it was just its design or whatever, and I didn't feel anything, but I could see it above me. Like 15 seconds later my mom came upstairs, and I never saw it again, and I think we lived there for a couple of years after that happened. I can still visualize the creature and remember how real it felt to me. Can't explain it. The mysterious ghost lights of Marfa, Texas, USA. I had the chance to see these about 10 years ago. I had gone out to see my mom, who was living in Terlingua at the time, and we made the trip over to Marfa one night to have dinner and check out the lights. They have a really cool observation deck just outside of town with binoculars and seating. We were lucky, and the lights came out almost as soon as we arrived. It really is hard to put into words, but it looked like little fireballs or headlights way off in the distance. I remember thinking we were just seeing a road going into town, but then the lights started heading upwards and dancing around. Again, I'm not doing a great job describing it, but it was really cool. Then we went into town. That place is strange. Since a lot of their town is centered around these lights outside town, they keep the light pollution in town to a minimum. Everything was dark. Hardly any street lights or bright signage on businesses. The place just felt like a ghost town. We went into 2 restaurants after we had checked out the lights. At the first one, everyone seemed to stop talking when we came in, and we were told that they had no availability even though half of the place was empty. We couldn't get anyone to even acknowledge us at the second place. Very strange. It's not like we stood out or anything, we are just country bumpkins like everyone else that was in there. We ended up at a pizza place that was very hip but completely empty before getting out of there. I'm sure the town is great, but we all found it to be a little eerie that night. I had 2 incidents at the same location about 23 and 24 years ago. The first occurred shortly after my late wife and I moved into the home we just bought. With the move, I started walking my sweet dog, Pablo, in a new spot for his nightly outing. I went to the bridge over the town's main street, High Street, which was about 4 blocks from the house. Pablo could step off the approach to the bridge and relieve himself in the high weeds there. I often walked him on weekends at like 2 or 3 a.m., as I often worked late and my sleep schedule was messed up. On one of these first early morning walks as Pablo was in the weeds, I heard someone running hard south down a street that tees into High Street. I looked up to see a young man in his late teens bawling the jack down the street. It was in September, and the teen had a maroon nylon jacket of a style popular in the early 1990s that was styled like leather jackets with elastic piping around the collar, waist, and wrists. He had on blue jeans and white athletic shoes and had a mild mullet. I looked to see if anyone was chasing the teen, but there was nothing, just him running hard down the street. The area south of High Street in which the street the teen was teeing into is a small park about 2 blocks east to west and 1 block deep. It is bounded on the east by a creek spanned by the aforementioned bridge, on the south by a deep forested ravine and shallow stream that dumps into the creek, and by woods to the west. The teen ran into this park and disappeared. There was no sight of the teen, no rustling in the undergrowth surrounding the park, nothing. He was just gone. When I got home, I told my wife of the strange incident. She thought it odd enough to mention it at a church function she attended the next morning. The woman she was talking to said, "Oh, he saw Austin." Austin is a ghost of a teen who died at the site after his speeding car sped through the T intersection and crashed. Others had seen him there, the woman told my wife. I later walked into the park and found a bronze marker with an image of a teen named Austin who died at the site. His family gave the seed money to develop the park at the spot as a memorial. 2. About a year later in early October, I was on another early morning walk with Pablo. Again at the bridge, I saw someone step onto High Street from the top of the hill to the east. Again, it was like 3 a.m. The figure walked toward me a couple of blocks before I could see that it was the Grim Reaper. I watched as Pablo finished and then started walking back east up the slope toward home. The Grim Reaper was walking fast enough to close the distance between us while I allowed Pablo to explore as he preferred to do on his leash. Soon, the Grim Reaper crossed High Street near me and started walking on a sidewalk on the north side. I was going to say something like cool costume, but when it passed by me, I just decided not to address it. I just said to Pablo, "We're going to let that walk on by." For his part, Pablo, usually eager to meet strangers, had no interest in the Grim Reaper. It's been more than 2 decades, but I remember its robe was not some cheap Halloween costume but apparently thick wool with a full hood and cinched at the waist with a rope. It had a farm sickle it held over its right shoulder. I seem to remember a bearded face. I can't recall the type of footwear worn by the figure, or if I even paid attention to it. At any rate, the Grim Reaper continued east on High Street to our town's main intersection and then disappeared as High Street slopes downhill, right by the police station. Probably just someone on an early Halloween prank, right? But why walk at 3 a.m. when few would see and take at least a 2-mile walk on a thinly populated section of town? And I think cops would want a word with someone walking at 3 a.m. with a large sickle. Driving down the road with a buddy, I'm in the passenger seat. We come up to an intersection and get in the left turn lane behind another car. Just chilling, waiting for the light to turn green. Literally the moment the light changed, the car in front of us made a loud banging noise, and smoke started coming out of their hood. My buddy's car also lurched and completely shut off. His car never worked properly after that moment either. Now one person having car issues is whatever. But 2 separate cars right next to each other, both cars experiencing massive mechanical engine failure at the exact same time down to the second. There's absolutely no way. I'm not sure if bad luck is a physical manifestation and we entered a bubble of it, or our cars got hit by some neutrinos or some wild shit, but that moment shattered my reality and made me question our basic physical reality. When I lived in Boston about 25 years ago, a group of me and 3 friends went to a small club to see a rock band. We parked our car in a nearby lot with about 20 other cars in it. As we were walking from our car through the lot, we came across a small Toyota station wagon, the model with a high roof. I forget which exact model it was, and in the cargo area of that wagon, separated from the rest of the car with one of those metal dog fences, was this person. The person was all alone, sitting in the way back of the car. wearing one of those old school hooded winter jackets with the fur lining around the opening of the hood. They had the hood up, and one of them glanced at this hooded thing and stopped to look closer. We all kind of stopped with him and looked as well. This person was sitting cross-legged on the floor and was looking mostly down at their feet. They were small, but not the size of a child, rather, they resembled a smaller adult. We couldn't figure it out. One of my buddies gently knocked on the rear window, and the person inside looked up. Their face looked like a Neanderthal. Super dark colored eyes that seemed to have absolutely no emotion or personality behind them, looking back at us, expressionless face, but moving and sniffing, looking around, with spotty, poorly grown in facial hair and messy, greasy looking hair protruding from the hood. The jacket they were also wearing looked greasy and dirty and was, well, a bit frayed and old. We were absolutely perplexed. We tried communicating with them, asking if they were okay. There was no response at all, and they barely even acknowledged that we had said anything. They seemed to stop paying attention to us and were doing something with their hands that we couldn't quite see. The creature started to act a little nervous as we continued to talk to each other, staring at this sight. They kind of shuffled around in the back and turned their back on us like a primate would do. We wondered if we were getting punked. We looked around for anyone who might be watching us to see our reactions, but there was no one. If I had to describe it in layman's terms, they looked like a caveman. Strange facial features, and those very dark eyes, no pupil could be seen. There was nothing remarkable about the vehicle, no odd things in the passenger cabin. Just this weird creature stuck in the back of this car in some random back parking lot with poor lighting and no foot traffic. Otherwise, it's kind of hidden away. Which led us to discard the idea that it was a prank, as who other than us would ever even have the chance to wander upon it. I've never come up with any reasonable explanation for it, other than we stumbled across some kind of mutant that couldn't be out in public and whose keepers kept them locked up in the back of a station wagon when they went out of the house. This thing didn't speak, have emotions, or even have human expressions. They weren't wearing a mask, as you could easily make out their features changing as they looked at us and reacted in a shy or non-communicative way. It was super odd, and whenever I talked to any of the guys from that night, they all remain absolutely dumbfounded by what we saw, and nobody has forgotten it. Somewhere around 1989 to 1990, while cruising around our small town, a friend and I saw two orange balls that had tails traveling in tandem 30 to 40 feet off the ground. The objects were identical to each other and never changed their position relative to one another. They looked like two cartoon comets. We followed them to the edge of town, where they crossed the road in front of us and changed trajectory. We decided we didn't want to follow that weird shit into the countryside in the dark, so we turned around and came back to town. Ran into a group of friends half a mile down the road and asked them if they saw it. They had not seen it and appropriately mocked us for our experience. We called it a night. A friend dropped me off at home, and I sat outside on the porch with my dog until someone else came home, illogically afraid to be in the house alone. My first memory. I'm 3 to 4 years old at the time. My dad had a farm and would hire local guys who were out of work as help. It's hot and humid, late August. Something happened to the combine. For those that don't know, a combine is as large as a small house. It's used to pull the corn off the stalk, then dump it into a bin on the back of it. So this combine is pulled up and parked right by the back door, and there's one hired helper draining the oil into a plastic tub. He's older and looks rough. But he's jovial and well-natured and worked for my dad on and off for a few years. My mom takes me to the back porch to ask if he needs anything. A drink? He says, "No, I'll just drink this motor oil." My mom maybe chuckles, ignores it, or whatever. I don't remember. She continues, "Rags? Another bucket? Food?" He says, "Yes, I'll take a sandwich." She goes in to make the sandwich, so it's just me and him. He cranes his neck, peers through the door to see if my mom has left. She has, looks at me, winks, and proceeds to drink the ducking oil. Not a few ounces, not fresh oil, but used black sludge filled to the brim of a milk jug. I can see through the milk jug, and I notice that he's chugging the oil. He finishes, winks again, and jokingly motions to another jug as if he's saying, "Would you like some?" I make a gesture along the lines of yes, I'd like to try. He says, "No, that's bad. It'll make you sick. You don't want that," and then proceeds to start chugging a second jug. Shortly after starting the second jug, we can hear my mom coming. He stops chugging the oil, sits it down, and winks for the third time. My mom takes me inside. All I can talk about is that man drinking the oil. Is it good? Can I drink oil? My mom tells me, he didn't drink the oil. If he did, he'd be dead. If you drink oil, you die. Don't drink oil. My mom is probably a little creeped out by him after this, so I'm instructed to stay inside. I post up by a window to see if he's going to die or get sick. At this point, I have lost track of time. I watch anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour. Nothing, he just keeps working as if nothing happened. There's no possible explanation, apart from that he drank the oil. It was in a jug, then gone. He couldn't have positioned himself to look like he was drinking the oil and pouring it out. It isn't water. There'd be a giant puddle of oil right outside the back door. He didn't have a jug of iced tea. It was oil. We had one of the large rectangular plastic jugs on its side with the side cut out. So the oil goes from the combine into a modified plastic jug, then you release the cap, letting the oil go to smaller jugs. It's kind of like those 2.5-gallon water jugs you buy at the grocery store. You set it on its side, press the nozzle, and water comes out. The second jug he started to drink came straight from the large tub. It was 1987, around 1 or 2 a.m., possibly later. My friend and I are walking home from hanging out with some other friends on a beautiful, warm night with no clouds and the stars out across a large park lawn. We're admiring the stars, and I see it, a large craft floating across the night sky, slowly rotating, to reveal the shape of 3 evenly spaced wings in a vague delta shape, with rectangular lights down the sides, but mostly dark, so that the shape was revealed mostly by the way it was blocking out stars behind it as it floated and rotated. I was guessing by the way it moved that it was enormous and far away. I pointed it out, and we froze and watched it from the big open lawn space as it crossed, absolutely dumbstruck, and finally ran to see where it was going as it started to be hidden by some trees as it edged down towards the horizon. But before it disappeared, it suddenly zipped off and away into space, completely and absolutely freaking us out. I wasn't scared though, just in utter awe. My friend, though, was terrified of anybody finding out that we saw this, because she said they would think we were crazy or making things up, and made me swear not to tell anyone. We were very young, and she was pretty worried about how she came across to people. I kept my promise and didn't tell any of our mutual friends, but later I did tell people, because it's the craziest thing I've ever seen, and I don't ever want to forget it. I'm glad I saw it with another person, so I know it wasn't just me, though. I've had a bunch of other odd things happen, no more UFOs or any other crazy sightings, just a few extremely unlikely/weird coincidences that are far too targeted to be coincidental, but mostly they're too personal to share here. Except for the fact that I've had some strangely precognitive dreams over the course of my life about random places I would go and people I would meet that were absolutely not important occurrences in my life in any way but were still surprisingly accurate. My former roommate and I both saw a man in our house, but there was no one there. We were preparing for a barbecue. My BF left to get stuff. My roommate and I were in the backyard getting stuff ready. I went into the house. There is a back door from my bedroom into a laundry room, which leads to the backyard. I don't remember why I needed to walk through the house after entering my room, but I did, and while in the hallway, I saw somebody walk past. I ran back to my room, locked the back door, and then locked my bedroom door. The bug had been walking from the living room to the kitchen, which is where the second door to the laundry was. The next thing I hear is my roommate banging on my door and trying to get in, screaming my name and asking if I was okay. He saw the person through the kitchen window walk through the back door into the laundry room, and since he wasn't in there when he ran in, he thought maybe he had gone into my room. We searched the house. There were no signs of a break-in. The front door was still locked. The neighbors have a camera that points directly to the front yard. They live across from us. There was nothing captured on the camera, only my husband living and then us freaking out looking around about 15 minutes later. So, we both saw this person in the house. We both described the same guy. He didn't come through the front or back door, and there's no evidence he left. He even checked the attic, and there was nothing. We assume it was a ghost since lots of weird shit happened there. When I was a kid, I grew up just a few houses down from one of the largest city parks in our country. It's a few miles of kept gardens, playgrounds, ponds, and wild growth with hiking trails. I loved walking at night and spent time outside whenever I could and had a lot of experiences that can't be explained. One is that there was a street lamp that always went off when I got within about 40 feet of it and would turn back on when I got about 40 feet away. It did this every time, regardless of if people were with me or not, so I have a lot of people who verified that this happened now that I'm an adult. It always made my skin crawl a little to be near it, but no one else felt anything. I would sneak out a lot and spend all night wandering in this park alone from a very young age, probably 3rd grade and up. I didn't have a great home life, and so I'd slip out as soon as everyone went to sleep, and I'd come back around 4 a.m. most days. Sometimes I had friends who were nearby who would meet me, but a lot of the time it was just me. This was back in the 90s, and I was a very small kid, so I just kind of slipped around unnoticed by other people who were also out and about. I had many experiences on my own that I just accepted as a kid without question that now give me goosebumps. There was one specific tree that was tucked away just behind a very well-kept rose garden that was okay during the day but absolutely terrifying at night. It grew twisted in a way that seemed like it wouldn't have been intentional because it was. The word ugly comes to mind, but that's not quite right. There was just something wrong about it. You couldn't pay me to get close to it at night. Same rose gardens. One time I snuck out in the middle of winter when a storm had knocked out power, so there were no artificial lights anywhere in the park or the surrounding houses, but it was an absolutely huge full moon. The snow was probably at least 6 inches and had a thin crust on it, and it was definitely below freezing, and probably around 3 a.m. I remember I stepped into this small flat area surrounded by climbing roses, and I was suddenly not cold but actively warm. Warm like a spring day. I slipped off my coat and sweater until I was down to a t-shirt and weirdly felt compelled to take my boots and socks off as well. Then I just felt this urge to dance in the moonlight in the roses, and I was perfectly warm and serene. My feet didn't get cold, and the thin layer of ice didn't cut me off from anything. I've never felt anything like that before or since. I would also sneak into the Japanese garden and light unscented floating candles in the water, then strip down to my undies and wait out to collect them before going home, leaving no trash behind or anything. I was always cautious about wearing lotions or anything that could hurt the huge koi fish that inhabited the pond. There was a rock that was about 15 away from the shore that I would sit on and watch the candles from, and the fish would come up to the surface and swim slowly in the candlelight. There were several fish that had markings that made them look like faces in the water looking back up at me. I did this all year, and it was our first date. It was beautiful and serene, but I never felt alone there. I always felt the presences there were very welcoming because I was respectful of the space. Currently, they have security cameras, and I would be unable to enter covertly even if I wished to, which I find disappointing. However, I appreciate that I was fortunate to grow up in an environment with such measures. There were also just pockets of good and bad energy. I would structure my nighttime wanderings to avoid the bad pockets and stick to neutral space or good pockets as much as possible. There were a few places where bad pockets were somewhat unavoidable to get to certain places I really liked, but there were different rules for how to get through them. One was walking under a stone bridge with a streetlight on the other side. You looked straight ahead to the streetlight, walked at a steady pace without running, and didn't let anything distract you until you were back in the light. Important stuff. That's just a few things that come to mind. Throughout my life, I have experienced peculiar, recurring dreams concerning a particular woman who resided in the 1600s. I have dreamed about her name, her place of residence, her occupation, her marital status, her husband's early death, her friends, and more. They're weird, but I always wrote them off as, dreams are weird, so these dreams are weird. About 2 years ago, I was bored one night, so I decided to thoroughly search old records from the digitized government documents of 2 places where I believed she had lived. And I found her. I found baptism records, a newspaper mention about a business sale that listed her as an employee, and a single entry in a Voc ledger indicating she received a life insurance payout due to the violent and unexpected death of her husband, who had the name he was supposed to have. I even found a mention of her best friend. She was no one. She was a seamstress who transitioned into a teaching career. There's literally no way I could have ever heard of her, much less known about the intimate details of her life. I am a fairly skeptical person. However, this particular situation is one that I cannot explain rationally. I have at least 2 major stories. I'll try to keep them short. 1. I was around 16 to 17 years old, and I lived with my family in a rural area. That day was super weird because I had multiple of those flashes that show what will happen. I have them, but not as often as I used to. I believe it's a matter of my busy mind. I had that gut feeling that something will happen. I knew that. My mobile was on the table, and I stared at it because I had that weird and strong feeling that my friend would call me with some crazy idea. And she did after 30 seconds, maybe. The weird thing was that she never called me, she always texted me. She called to ask if I want to see the moon eclipse, and I agreed. We met on the way to the place that is away from the village, around 1.5 kilometers from my home. I remember that there was a fog above the grass when we were walking to the place where we wanted to look at the moon. There is a forest and a meadow, a river with a bridge and dam separates them. It was around 9 p.m. We were sitting above the dam, so we had to speak loudly because of the falling water. Then my friend got scared and asked me if I heard it. I turned my head and noticed a helicopter flying somewhere. I said that it's just a helicopter, and we ignored it. A few minutes after that we heard a different sound. It was the only time I've heard something like that. It was a deep, buzzing sound, It felt like it was getting through my whole body. We turned around and noticed lights above the forest. There were 7 to 9 bright lights in an almost straight line. The lights seemed to be the source of the buzzing. We went to the bridge, and I gasped something like, "Oh my God, what is this?" And we were looking at it. Then it blinked and disappeared. 2. Backstory: I was raised by my mom. We lived in my grandmother's house with my mom's 3 brothers and grandmother. I am an only child in this family. I've never seen my father because he didn't want me. He told my mom that he's not ready for a child. Her heart was broken. She told him to never see me until I'm an adult. I was 13 to 14 years old. It was winter, the 15th of February. It was evening, and I was preparing to go to bed. I went to the bathroom, which was upstairs. My bedroom was downstairs, so when I finished, I got out of the bathroom and looked down on the mid-stairs. Google says it's called a mezzanine. The light was on in the hall downstairs, so the mezzanine wasn't dark. I stopped on the top of the stairs because I saw a person standing there. It was more like a shadow, but I knew that was a man. I was looking at him, blinking, not believing my eyes. I wasn't scared, just curious and surprised. I have no idea how long I've been standing there, maybe a few minutes, maybe a couple of seconds, but when it disappeared, I shrugged and went to bed. 2 days later, I understood what happened. It was Saturday. My mother came into my room, woke me up, and asked, "Are you going with me to your father's funeral?" I was shocked and not sure if I heard correctly what she said. "My what?" And she calmly replied, "Your father." I came with her. On his grave was a plate with the day of death, 15.02. I saw a predator-style camouflaged person about 20 years ago in a national forest, USA. Not Appalachia. 2 friends and I would hike out deep into the forest once a year and stay a few nights. I'm talking about a good 4-hour hike off trail into thick woods until we found a sufficiently remote place devoid of all light and human-related sounds or where people normally would even pass through. The woods were completely alive that far out, especially at night. So many noises, bug, animal, tree, and otherwise, were normal. On the final full day of our trip, we'd hike out first thing the next morning while it was cool, about an hour before dusk. I'm sitting there tending the fire as one of my buddies sits next to me as we have a conversation about something, and the other is off behind us gathering some firewood. We hear where he is, behind us. My friend next to me suddenly stops talking. I get the feeling at that point I'm being watched. I stop what I'm doing and look over at my friend, and he's staring up at about a 45-degree angle into the trees. I follow his eyes, and there it is. Something about 50 feet up in a huge black cherry tree, just staring down at us. It was humanoid-shaped. If it was standing upright, I'd guess maybe 7 feet tall. And completely see-through. The only way you could tell it was there was because colors would kind of shift around it. If you weren't looking directly at it, you would probably miss it. Sunlight was also streaming in from that direction, possibly making it more pronounced. Regardless, it faded away. It didn't jump down, make any noise, or move much at all, it just shimmered a bit and was gone. Since it was so close to dusk and we were so far out, we couldn't safely leave until morning. That was one of the longest nights of my life. All 3 of us had separate tents, but that night slept together crammed into one. And before anyone asks, no, we weren't drinking or taking any drugs. Completely sober. In the years afterward, we've convinced ourselves that it was just a trick of the light, the sunshine of the setting sun through early autumn leaves in a thick forest. But honestly, that is just us coping with it. Because otherwise, what was that thing? I was out in the desert of Arizona near the Superstition Mountains some years ago, camping with friends. I usually avoided that part of the desert because trips there with more than just me and my dogs were always chaotic, but my friends, who had a lot of outdoor experience and had camped together before, convinced me to go. A group of us arrived early with just our chairs, personal belongings, firewood, and a keg. The rest of our gear would be arriving an hour or so later with the rest of the camping party. After an hour and some change of sitting around in the desert, it had gotten dark, and I needed to use the restroom and excused myself. I walked far enough away from the group that the fire was still visible, but it was small, just a glow in the nearest distance. It took me maybe 3 minutes to walk to where I stopped to pee. Peeing took me maybe a minute. I finished and stood up, pulling up my shorts, and noticed an animal not too far from me, away from the direction of the group. I watched it for maybe 2 minutes, but it stayed huddled near some sparse brush and didn't appear to be interested in coming toward me. Next thing I knew, I was hearing my name being called by multiple members of the group. Just as I turned to look behind me, I saw the animal rise to its feet. It was much, much taller than it had originally looked to be, and I had no idea what it was. I spent so many years exploring that desert, Had done a lot of research on the wildlife, and I had received outdoor training specific to the desert. I still to this day cannot identify what I saw. Instead of turning around to look for my friends, I kept my eyes on the thing that was now taller than me. It didn't move, just kept watching. My friends were continuing to call my name, sounding more and more panicked, but for some reason I was unwilling to respond or look away. The really odd thing was that I was not at all afraid. By my estimation, it took maybe an additional 2 or 3 minutes for someone to get close enough to us to notice me in the dark, and when they did, the thing turned and ran so fast into the desert that it was long gone by the time they got to me. All in all, I am absolutely certain it was around 10 minutes from the time I left the group. I was a little irritated that they had scared the thing away but just asked what the problem was and why everyone was yelling. I informed them of my destination and assured them that I remained in sight, explaining that I was only gone for a few minutes. They said I was gone for well over an hour. Immediately following this incident, the trip very predictably, to me, descended into absolute chaos, rendering what had happened fairly much forgotten. One of the highlights of which is someone we didn't know coming with someone we did, with no notice, that person having 1 or maybe 2 beers, then grabbing a gun to go shooting in the desert. This would be a significant issue because he appeared so inebriated that he could barely walk and was walking toward the highway in the distance. His gun was taken away, which set him off, and a huge brawl followed. To make a long story slightly shorter, I ended up hitting him in the face with the butt of his gun like it was a baseball bat to subdue him because I was afraid he was actually going to end someone in his rage. That seemed to knock some sense into him, and after I tossed him some gauze and tape from my kit and told him to take care of himself, he went to bed. We slept in 2 shifts that night because we were unsure he wouldn't get back up. The following day I had to stitch him up. I swear, it was like he was a different person. He said that he remembered everything that happened but as if he was watching from outside of his body. He apologized to everyone, and as he was the only one with more than a couple of bruises and appeared genuinely contrite, he was allowed to stay. I retained control of his weapon for the duration of the trip, his idea, and he was on his best behavior. Other significant events occurred during that trip, but none were as dramatic. I never took anyone to that part of the desert again, nor did I ever see anything like the creature. I did see plenty of other high weirdness out there on my solo trips. About a decade ago we lived in the mountains, and I swore there was just something very wrong with that place. It was like the land was bad or something. We had the worst luck, and bad stuff was constantly happening. Well, one day my husband was driving up the mountain to come home, and his car, a brand new Jeep Grand Cherokee, broke down. He called me, and I got in my Mercedes-Benz to go get him. I'm about a mile away when I hear this awful grinding sound, and something blasts through my hood. The car immediately stopped running. The part that shot out of the engine, some kind of gasket? Almost hit me through the windshield. I tried to call him but got no service, so I ended up hitchhiking to him a mile away. Luckily a very nice dad with his kids in the backseat picked me up. My husband was so confused to see me get out of some rando's truck. I told him what happened, and the reality hit us that both cars are basically fried. We ended up getting a double tow down the mountain to a mechanic. The tow guy couldn't believe our bad luck. Later, we found out that the MBZ needed an entire new engine, and that part absolutely shouldn't have blown through the hood like that. They said they'd never seen that before. We believed this was more than a coincidence, as something had been draining our car batteries for months prior, and it wasn't from the cold, it was summer. Every time we'd go to drive off, the cars would both be completely drained of their batteries, despite having new ones. It would also mess with the electronics at the house, turn lights or TVs on full blast at 3 a.m. We moved after things actually got dangerous for us there, very long story. We lost a ton of money in moving, but I'm not sure we would have survived staying there. The lady who lived there prior was hit and ended by a drunk driver, and there were just constantly deadly accidents off our road, the highway. But my health took the biggest hit. It was like something was sucking the life out of me while living there. In the late 70s, when I was about 7, we moved into a new, to us, house. Soon after I had a dream about a little boy sitting at an angled drafting/art desk counting pennies one by one, sliding them in an arc from one side of the table to the other in the room that was now my sister's bedroom. He was wearing a 2-piece button-up pajama set and had glasses on. Behind him on the wall was one of those old phones where you held an earpiece to your ear but talked into the box on the wall. One night after that, I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I finished, washed my hands, turned off the light, and opened the door. When I walked out into the hallway, that little boy was walking toward me with his arms held out like he wanted me to come to him. I walked backwards until I ran into the wall, and he was still coming toward me. I fell on my butt, covered my eyes, and started screaming. The next thing I knew, My parents were there and took me to their bed. In the morning when we discussed what happened, they told me it was just a dream and I had nothing to be scared of. Knowing that I wasn't crazy, I decided to go into my sister's room and look around. Right there on the wall, where I saw that old phone hanging in my initial dream, there were 2 old holes with mounting brackets that had been painted over. Strange coincidence? Or did I really experience something I can't explain? I'm 54 now and still remember all of it like it was yesterday. Sounds unbelievable, but I will swear by this until the day I die. I grew up about 30 miles west of Cleveland, and there was an urban legend about a headless guy named Pojo who haunted the woods behind our apartment building. I cannot remember all the details of his story or why he was headless, but I know we always tried to scare each other about it. Well, it was one afternoon, and we were walking along the top of a ravine on a path that led down into the woods. There was a small creek that ran through it as well, so there were some smaller sandbars here and there you could see. It was myself along with my sister and 3 other kids, 1 was my friend, and 2 were her friends. We were all walking along, and I looked down and saw something moving along the one sandbar. We all stopped to look. Again, I will swear on this until the end of my days. I saw a hand come out of the ground to about mid-forearm. It popped up and moved left to right about 6 to 8 feet and slowly lowered itself back down into the sandbar. We obviously ran the duck away as fast as possible, and we all avoided that part of the woods for a long time, and I did until we moved out around a year or so later since my stepdad joined the military. Fast forward a few years, and we moved back to Ohio, across town from our old apartments. I met a kid who lived on the street over from our new house. He just moved in, and we ended up becoming best friends for years. I was about 9 or 10, and he was 12 or 13. We were friends for years, and he actually is now married to my cousin. I am 40 now. Just the context of how long I knew him. We really didn't talk about paranormal stuff since we were always playing sports. He wasn't at all interested in any horror stuff or anything like that at all, so it wasn't ever talked about. Even around Halloween. Well, in our 20s we both had girlfriends, and it was a week or so before Halloween, so we all went to a haunted house. On the way we brought up ghosts and paranormal stuff. I brought up the Pojo story in the apartments that I lived in, and he turned white as a ghost and kept saying bullshit. Finally, he told me that he too lived there when he was younger, and he had an older brother who scared him with the story of Pojo and said that if he didn't do stuff for him, his brother would take him down to the ravine and let Pojo take him. He brought up a story about him, his brother, and a few kids walking along the creek to a point where it was steeper on each side. One of the kids was a bit bigger and not as fit, and the rest of them climbed up and said that they would leave him there for Pojo unless he ate a handful of dirt. Sure enough, he said that kid, without thinking, scooped up an entire handful of dirt and started eating it because he was so scared. I'm a biologist and used to work at a field station where we lived on site. The buildings were originally owned by a millionaire who built everything back in the 1920s, but the whole property was gifted to the Research Institute after he died unexpectedly. My bedroom was the old master bedroom in the house the guy used to live in. There were a few nights while I lived there that I was drifting off to sleep, and I woke up very suddenly and had the strongest sense that a man was standing over my bed. I would basically just lie there and try to calm myself down until I fell back asleep. I never mentioned this to anyone until my roommate one day mentioned feeling something very similar when she was sleeping. A few other people who lived in different houses on the property would mention hearing or seeing strange things. And I recently met a few people who lived in the same house I used to live in, and I casually asked them if they ever noticed anything strange, and they started describing things very similar to what I and my old roommate experienced. We're all scientists, so we're pretty rational/logical people, but this is something none of us can quite explain. I have this really strange memory that I can't explain. I grew up in rural Australia and went to a school camp when I was about 12 to 13 years old. The boys' and girls' rooms were in 2 rows facing away from each other. The place we were staying at was a really old homestead, Kenilworth Homestead, which was built alongside the Mary River in a place where many Aboriginals were known to be buried. At one point during the night, either I or my friend Rohan, there were 4 to 5 to a room, I think, but only me and Rohan were awake, noticed and pointed out these shadows that were near above one of the bunk beds in our room. There wasn't a projector, lights, or any other source of light besides the moon coming into the room. We noticed these shadows moving, and then I remember seeing very vivid images in the shadows. I saw ships in a harbor, and it then transformed into a bird's eye view of some kind of football stadium. I know that it morphed into a bunch of other things, but I oddly can't remember them. What was particularly unusual about my memory of the entire experience is that neither Rohan nor I seemed perplexed or in awe of what we saw, we simply accepted it. I can't recall why, but we then left the room and walked into a field on the other side of the camp, facing the girls' rooms. I remember that we began walking down a slope, and when I looked towards one of the girls' rooms, the light was on. I saw it was filled with dozens of rabbits running around like crazy, jumping from bed to bed. I pointed it out to Rohan, and again we didn't really react much, and then we began walking towards the room. I can remember vividly that as we got closer, the rabbits began transforming into the girls who were actually inside the room, not exactly transforming, I don't know how to put it. Again, neither I nor Rohan really said much about it. I also remember while we, the class, were at the camp, about 3 girls in our class who were walking around together ran into a small room we were doing activities inside, absolutely hysterical and claiming they saw someone in the bush watching them, and they demanded to be picked up and taken home. I attended many different schools while growing up, and I swear to God this is true. There were 2 occasions when people I met at other schools mentioned experiencing similar events to those at their schools during their visits to Kenilworth Homestead. On one occasion, when I started to tell the story and had only mentioned the name Kenilworth Homestead, a girl sitting next to my friend interrupted me, exclaiming, that place is haunted." I never got her story. Another time, my friend James in high school shared a story from another friend of his who had camped at Kenilworth, which involved hearing glass shattering in their room continuously throughout the night. The things I saw were obviously unusual, but it's also very strange to me that Rohan and I never mentioned those events to each other or discussed how unusual they were. I have not communicated with Rohan in over a decade, but we maintained a friendship for some time thereafter, long enough for it to be mentioned. When I was in the army, I spent a few years in the Mojave Desert training units before they went to Iraq/Afghanistan. One night in 2007 the unit I was working with finished a mission at about midnight and was going to rest until morning. Instead of going home, I picked a nice secluded spot in a draw to take a nap in my Humvee. I fell asleep briefly but woke up to the sound of scratching gravel, like someone was dragging their feet probably 25 meters behind me. I looked into the darkness behind me and saw a humanish shape that was darker in contrast to the surrounding hill. It appeared to be moving toward me. I grabbed my nods and looked up to see what was definitively a humanish shape, and it was slightly blurry, but not due to the nods. I could look to the side, and everything else was clear. So I had a blurry, human-shaped shadow approaching me at a decent clip and could hear the movement. At that point I felt the most significant wave of fear I have ever felt. I had survived 2 high-intensity deployments as an infantryman and was, at the time, a fearless idiot. This felt like I had fear injected straight into my veins, like it was beamed at me. I started my truck up and zoomed off. As soon as I got away, I called up to see if there was anyone operating in that area, and there wasn't, which is why I chose that spot to begin with. My personal experiences. Hello all, I've been deep in paranormal for a couple of weeks now, and it convinced me to finally put down in writing a handful of events that shaped me as a person. The only people I've ever told these to are my wife and older children. I live in Ohio. Make of these what you will, believe me or not, but they are events I've replayed hundreds of times in my head, still trying to make sense of. 1. This event occurred when I was 4 to 5 years old, likely between 1991 and 1992. One sunny day, I went outside to play. My mom would just let me out the door and tell me to stay on the street, so I made sure to thoroughly explore the small territory given to me. I was always looking for strange places to find snakes, frogs, etc. We had an old couple who lived across the street from us, and I really wanted to see what was behind their garage. There was a tall wooden fence behind the garage that belonged to the property behind them. I walked down their driveway, and as I got behind the garage, I froze with fear. The corner fence panels were broken off, and a tall black dog came through the fence. It made no noise, didn't pant or bark, and just stared me down with black eyes. Behind it, a second dog, pure white, poked its head through the fence. They were both the same breed, lithe and pure muscle. There was no way I could have known as a child, but their heads and features were exactly like how Anubis is depicted. Long face, large pointy ears. My parents told me to never run from a stray dog, but I was overwhelmed with absolute, facing certain death terror. I ran home as fast as I could and hid in my room, never once looking back. I lived in that neighborhood until I was 19. I frequently wandered through my street and the adjacent neighborhoods during my childhood, and I have not encountered those dogs since. 2. My dad worked at our local hospital around this same time. We only had one car, so my mom would load me up, and we would pick him up from work every night. She would get extremely angry because I constantly unbuckled my seatbelt and looked out the back window of the car, resting my arms on the scratchy felt that sedans have above the seat. We were heading down the hill to an intersection by our house, and to the left of the road was a big vacant field. On this particular day I looked out the window and saw a teenage boy from our neighborhood kneeling in the field, clasping his hands like he was praying. He was crying and pleading. Surrounding him were at least a dozen men in brown robes. They were old, had pale skin, and had white hair and beards. Some of their heads were bald on top, but their remaining hair came down to their shoulders. I also couldn't have known this at the time, but they looked like Franciscan monks. They were stone-faced and solemn, like they were indifferent to his pleading. I watched the event until we turned the corner of the intersection. I vaguely remember telling my mom, "Look, look." But her response was, "I can't look, I'm driving." The hill was on the driver's side of the road, so she should have seen them when we came down, but she never said anything or wasn't paying attention. The boy was in high school at this time, I believe. He lived in that neighborhood well into adulthood, but he was hardcore into drugs and also part of the group of kids that loved to bully the younger kids, so I never spoke to him, just a bad person in general. Years ago, I had an unforgettable and unexplainable experience. When I was a teen, maybe 2017-ish, I was home alone and doing dishes in the kitchen with earbuds in. I was in a full jam session while scrubbing. Headbanging, dancing, and everything. When suddenly, I felt that instinctual feeling when someone is staring at you. When you turn your head without even thinking about it. And there, just maybe 2 feet away, was the silhouette of a man. Made of this blue hazy light. There were no discernible details, but the shape indicated that it was a man. I paused, stunned and trying to process what I was seeing. He seemed to notice me looking back in that split second, and with literal blink and you'll miss it speed, he blurred down the hallway in a streak of blue light. I stood there frozen for maybe 3 to 5 seconds before I decided to follow just to verify that no one was home. The entire house was empty. And I didn't see anything else that night. I tried to rationalize it, but my mind circled back to the moment I noticed eyes on me. There had been no sound or movement to alert me because I could only hear music while looking down into the sink. It was the feeling of eyes on me that made me look up. The human reaction of someone staring. Chills just thinking about it now. The kicker is, my grandfather had passed maybe a month prior to this, and he didn't get to see us much. On a separate occasion, when I had moved out as an adult, I was leaving my bedroom for a midnight snack. And when I opened the door, there was someone nearly face to face with me. I froze in the doorway, but I was more open to it this time. Same blue light silhouette but different stature, different person. No visual detail. But he felt familiar. His height, the point where we met, felt like standing in front of someone I used to know who'd long passed. I recognized him. Said his name like a question, blinked, and he was gone. Weird sighting. The event was when I was 6. My brother was 10, and there's a dog. Now everyone takes out the dog, and for us it was around 9 p.m. or so. It was dark out, and my dad was in the garage relaxing. We have this little green near the garage for our apartments, so he's basically next to us. The strange part is that all 3 of us felt the air grow cold. We saw an almost kid-like drawing of a creature. It looked at us and walked on, but there's no way it was just me as a kid seeing something I didn't understand. The dog was extremely frightened. It is a large dog, and my brother observed it as well, noting the same details. The creature resembled a child's drawing of a figure staring down from a wall. The creature had a stick figure body resembling a cat shape and a hollow upside-down triangle with an eye in each corner. It glowed in the darkness, and there are no streetlights nearby. We ran to tell my father, who was in the garage, but he laughed it off. The creature was so strange that I couldn't believe such a thing could exist in the world. Does anyone know what I saw? Early this summer I woke up from a loud noise outside my window between 2 and 3 a.m. It was brief but sounded like something falling over, or a branch breaking, or a gate closing. I just remember being startled awake and then noticing a nearly non-existent hum, like electricity, or the hum of an appliance like a freezer or fridge if you put your ear to it, but deeper. Like an engine miles away with no fluctuation in pitch. My mind immediately went to the possibility that the pool pump is running dry from a packed skimmer. We live on acres, it's quiet, but sound travels. It was a clear night that night. I can remember seeing the stars and the moon directly through my window while I played on my side, no clouds. I got out of bed and stood at the window. Typically you can see the pool pump and heater if it's day, but at night you typically just see a red LED under the tree line if the heater is on. I looked out the window and over the yard where the pool pump sits and noticed a dull orange glow similar to someone holding their hand over a flashlight but in a large area. It wasn't well defined at first, my eyes were still adjusting. I was trying to locate the source when I realized the light was moving slowly and about 10 feet around, casting a perfect circle in front of the tree line. Like a dull searchlight from a helicopter, but the pump is under the trees. I was scanning, looking for figures, imagining kids were out there messing around by the pool. Then the light moved slowly in my direction over the outside edge of our raised deck next to our pool. Roughly about 50 from my window. It crossed my mind that someone was in the yard with a flashlight messing with the pool equipment. The circle of light continued to move at a steady pace of a few feet a second. The light moved across the deck, across the steps, and through a small patch of grass to the edge of our patio, which is about 15 feet from my window, before continuing onward. A small tree, only a couple of years old, sits at the corner of my house, and its top height aligns with the bottom edge of my window. As the light moved, it lit up the top of the branches immediately outside the window within 5. I realized, still half asleep, that it had to be coming from above. I turned my head on its side to try to catch where it was coming from but didn't catch any source outside before the light drifted across the tree, hit the roofline, and disappeared. We have a second-story walkout on the back of our home that is a flat roof sitting over an old garage/addition. It's about 30 wide and 20 deep. I swung open the bedroom door, sprinted down the hall, and immediately went out onto the flat roof, expecting a drone or helicopter overhead, but when I got outside, it was dead silent. No more hum, no traffic sounds, no planes or drones, there weren't crickets or even wind. All I heard were my steps and the screen door slam behind me a few seconds later, followed by complete silence. I scanned across the entire sky and the entirety of the yard that I could see for a couple of minutes, and there was nothing. The outside felt unnaturally vacant and eerily still. Like I was on a movie set, it somehow didn't seem real. Then, the unsettling sensation of someone watching me from behind jolted me, as if I were prey and had stumbled into a trap. My adrenaline spiked, and I felt the immediate urge to run inside. Pure dread, something felt undeniably wrong. At the same time I had an inner dialogue that I needed to very calmly walk inside and close the door. I had to be very inconspicuous about the fact that I was aware that there was any danger. I calmly went back inside, locked the door, and got back in bed. My wife asked me why I had run out of the room so suddenly, and I explained that I thought I heard kids outside. She rolled back over, and I lay watching out the window for some time, wondering what the duck just happened, before finally falling asleep. I realized that this doesn't seem excessively wild and is completely anticlimactic, but this was such an odd experience for me that it has stuck with me vividly. I don't have any insight into what it was and didn't share here to speculate. Hasn't happened before or since. I have never experienced such a strong intuition that something was amiss, even in the absence of concrete evidence to support it. I've experienced a lot of unexplainable things, but my mind turns to one in particular more than the rest. It was super weird, and y'all might think I was hallucinating or nuts, but I had 3 witnesses, 2 dogs and a cat, but still. It was around 2 a.m., summer 2002. I was smoking my nightly cigarettes in the backyard and reading a book. My 2 dogs were at my feet, and the stray cat we'd been taking care of was sitting nearby. Our backyard was fairly large, more than 1/3 of an acre, with a big floodlight so we could see everything. No big trees. We had a big bench swing supported by an A-frame that stood about 12 tall and roughly 15 wide, with big long chains holding the swing part. I noticed movement and looked up to see the swing going back and forth sideways. I checked to see if Black Cat was still beside me, and yep, there he was. Both dogs are still lying around. All 3 animals were looking at the swing, though. I thought, okay, maybe some other animal jumped off and made it move. But the swing kept going, and the movement got bigger. To the point where the swing was passing under the A-frame, chains clanging at the top. Freaky. Then it just slammed to a stop. My eyes felt like they were going to pop out of my head. I don't know if I was even scared then because it was so shocking. Animals just kept watching, with no fear or surprise. As I was staring at the swing, unable to believe what I had just seen, it started again. I'm getting goosebumps typing this up, slowly at first, then bigger and bigger, and loud. Y'all, the chains were clanging and the frame was squeaking and groaning so loud I thought it was going to come apart. Then it slammed to a stop again. It was like it hit a wall. No more swinging, just the sound of the chains at the top rattling around. Dogs and cats were still staring like it was a show. It happened once more, the exact same thing as before. By this time I'm thoroughly freaked out. Sitting completely still. Book and cigarettes forgotten. The only thing going through my mind is that there's no way this is happening, and if it is, I can't go inside because I don't want whatever it is to follow me. Of course, I have to go in at some point. I don't know how long I sat there and waited, but I didn't sleep much that night. The swing never did anything else, despite dragging it to 3 different houses in 15 years. It was reduced to firewood a couple of years ago, And normally I'm sentimental about things I've had in my possession for a long time, but not this time. The second thing that comes to mind is the 5 chrome balls I saw flying overhead, about 50 up, in a V formation. When I was about 20 years old, I lived in a room in my parents' garage. There was a field nearby that was being prepared for the construction of new houses, so there was lots of heavy machinery and digging during the daytime. Once when I was about to go to sleep at around midnight, I suddenly heard noises from inside the garage, just behind my wall. It sounded like someone was moving heavy objects and climbing around on stuff. My first thought was that there was a burglar, but I had not heard the garage door opening. I armed myself with a metal pipe and went out to have a look. The garage door was closed, and I found no signs of anyone nearby. This continued for about a week. At first I was terrified, but after a few days I was becoming more annoyed because the noises disturbed my sleep. Every night there were sounds of heavy objects being pushed around, and I heard quick footsteps outside my window but never saw anything. The footsteps sounded like a heavy toddler running really fast. I began knocking on the wall, which made the sound stop for a moment before they continued again. This went on for 1 to 2 hours every night during the period. I never opened the garage at night, because I had a strong fear that told me to stay away. When I checked during the daytime, I never noticed a trace of anyone being there or moving anything inside. Eventually I got the idea that the construction work on the field next door had forced some kind of creature out of their home and that they were now taking refuge in my parents' garage. I told them that they had to find a new place to stay, and eventually the sounds just stopped reoccurring. Maybe I was hallucinating, but I've never had any other psychotic symptoms, and I've no history of mental health problems. I lived in a house with my husband, our 2 sons, and my childhood best friend with her 2 sons. At the time of this incident, our kids were probably ages 4 to 12. Like many American homes, there was no attic to speak of, but there was a crawl space with an access door in the hallway outside BF's room and her kids' room. There were no hinges or latches, it was just a square of plywood, painted the color of the ceiling, and it sat on a frame made of 2x4s. One day, we found it open. To do this, you'd have to push up on it, lift it over a little lip, and set it back down. We'd never used it, never gone up there, and never mentioned it around our kids. But it was open. We'd been home together all day. My husband and I investigated. We needed to pull over the dining room table and put a dining room chair on top of the table for my 6th husband to be able to see in, tall ceilings. Nothing. A few boxes were present, and every surface was covered in at least 2 inches of dust. Not one surface was disturbed. To this day, we don't know how it happened. We interrogated the boys, but honestly, they couldn't have reached it without climbing on some seriously tall furniture, and we would have seen them doing this. Obviously, the adults didn't do it. No strangers or workers had been in the house. We truly can't explain it. We call it the glitch house. We found random laundry that belonged to no one. Not like we just cleaned out the garage and old stuff found its way in, but like someone had slept over. Men's clothing that was big enough to fit 2 of my husbands, and women's clothing that neither my bestie nor I had ever seen before. She had a very distinctive sweater that duplicated itself. That one weirded us out, as I never ordered from that site, and neither of us ordered a second one. The whole house was weird, we were very relieved to move out. Not the scariest, but I experienced it. I must have been between 9 and 11 years old. When I was little, I used to sleep with the door half open because closed I was afraid, and completely open I was afraid too, so every evening my mother left the door so that I would not be afraid. That night, I woke up. It was not my habit to wake up at night. I couldn't sleep, I was in my thoughts, and suddenly I started thinking about demons and the devil. I would like to point out that it was not my habit to think about that, I was quite stressed, and it was preventing me from going back to sleep. I was trying to change position by standing up or turning in all directions. Lol. I'm clarifying in case anyone thinks I had sleep paralysis. Time seemed like an eternity, and my thoughts didn't stop in my head about the demonic presences. Then all of a sudden, it was as if my survival instinct had been activated, telling me to hide. My heart was beating so hard that I couldn't hear anything around me. I rushed under my duvet, as if it were a shield. Lol, and I heard someone or at least something running down the corridor to my room and then jumping on me. I was paralyzed, but as soon as it jumped on me, it disappeared. I think it was the biggest scare of my life. I couldn't fall asleep. That's it. When I was around 7 years old, I was playing hide and seek with my cousin outside. At the time, my mom and I were living with my great-grandpa, and he had a shed/garage building that he had built himself decades prior. The entire property is surrounded by forest, and we live in Appalachia, so there was already a weird air about the place in general. The inside of the building was probably 20 plus feet from the opening to the back wall and roughly 12 feet across. The floor was made of plain dirt extending to the back, where there was a wooden platform against the back wall, topped with a small window above it. The shed had no internal lights, and it was dark during the day except for the sunlight coming from that window. While I was searching for my cousin, I looked inside the shed and saw a man suddenly appear from below the window, staring at me. The man was very strange and abstract. He was black and white, like ink and paper, with splotches and stripes up and down his skin and clothing. It seemed as though his clothing was actually part of his skin, shaped differently to create the illusion of wearing clothes. He smiled at me and raised his hand to wave. His hand was gloved and had purple and green on it. I remember this vividly because it was the only thing on him in color. I remember feeling an intense feeling of fear and immediately running away and inside my house nearby. I tried telling my uncle and my mom that somebody was out there, and even my cousin claimed to have seen him after the fact, but nobody followed up, and they just dismissed it as kids having an overactive imagination. To this day, I have no idea what I saw, but I am certain that I did. While I was living there, I had many other strange occurrences, including waking up to see my bedroom door wide open and then closing itself, hearing heavy breathing outside of my window while waking up sometime after midnight, and hearing the sounds of drums and chanting coming from the forest nearby. I would love to know if anyone has any similar experiences or ideas about this. When I was in my early to late teens, I was very obsessed with the paranormal, and on Friday nights my friends and I would go to a supposed haunted place to try to find proof or to find natural reasons for things happening that were supposed to be paranormal. So I guess I was always allowing myself to see creepy stuff, but I have two occurrences that take the strangest experiences I've ever had and were the only two experiences I could never come up with an explanation for. First one. We were in an abandoned abbey. It was overcast and at a new moon, so there was no natural light, so we had our torches. When you have a torch, you struggle to see things in shadows, so sadly having the torch on didn't allow me to see too much except for where the torch was pointing. My friend and I were just walking around. I remember at this point we weren't trying to find anything paranormal, we weren't asking questions or recording, we were just walking around. We got to an area I hadn't traveled in the dark, so I shone my torch around a little to see where we were going, and as I began to pan it around, I saw a stereotypical monk. It's worth noting that as a kid my brother used to scare me by dressing as a dementor, so hooded figure fear has been present in my life since then. I halted my pan when I registered what I'd seen and quickly panned it back, but nothing was there. I was terrified to investigate, but where I had seen it was away from a wall and any windows, so it would have been standing in the middle of the room, so I wasn't seeing a shadow, as it definitely looked as though it had a physical form. The place was a half-destroyed abbey, so there were no filing cabinets or anything that could have looked like what I had seen. It wasn't another person, we'd have heard them escape. Now it was only me who saw it, so I've wondered for ages if it's my mind playing tricks on me and if there was the inherent fear that I'd see the thing that spooked me out the most, but I've never had anything solid to explain it away, especially as seeing a stereotypical monk with hood up was a common sighting, even though I understand this was not common practice for monks. It's always perplexed me. Second one. There was no explanation for the event that occurred to the three of us. In a popular haunted castle. We had saved up our money to be able to investigate there, and it had been a dream of ours for so long. So we arrived, placed our cameras, and began investigating. Being a castle, it had stairs, and I and two others were upstairs and started to go downstairs when suddenly the first friend just fell down the stairs. My other friend started to try and descend the stairs quickly to try and help my other friend, and I saw my other friend fall but catch herself on the railing, and she looked up to me. I can very much remember the fear in her eyes before I felt a hand on the lower right side of my back push me. I was standing at the top of the stairs and thankfully had a hand on the railing, so I grabbed onto it. As I looked to my friend, she said she'd been pushed. We both had the same experience. We helped our other friend up, who was in a fair bit of pain, and we headed towards the rest of our group and explained what happened. All three of us felt a hand push us, and upon further investigation, we discovered that each of us had a red handprint on our skin in the areas where we felt the push. We had to abandon the night, as the friend who fell first was in a lot of pain and had hit their head, so we drove to the hospital. The stairs were uneven, but with the handprints and the three of us feeling the same thing, I have never been able to explain it. Strange experience. Hello. I wanted to share an experience that happened to us last week. I'm a single mother of two girls, 11 and 14. I have two German Shepherd pups, Roma and Nova. My mother died when I was 19. I was talking to the girls properly for the first time about losing her. We were sitting in the living room. As I was speaking, my eldest pointed into the kitchen. We saw a heavy blue tinted mist start to form in midair. It rose up slowly, then descended again a few times, getting stronger and weaker. Nova stood up and walked into the kitchen through the mist, and it started to fade out. When Nova came back, every time she opened her mouth, clouds of blue mist came out. Since then, a few times both dogs have emitted that mist, like we do in cold weather, but indoors when we have central heating. Nothing about this felt threatening or scary. In fact, I and the girls felt relaxed and just witnessed it all unfolding. I wanted to pop this here to see if this is common or has happened to anyone else. For the record, it wasn't cooking steam or anything environmental that would make any sense. Some of the unexplainable stuff that has happened to me. Hopefully someone has had similar experiences. Let me start this off by saying that I neither believe nor disbelieve in the paranormal, as I have no proof for either. I would say that I lean more towards believing, but I approach my life as a skeptic for my own mental peace. These all happen at different times in my life and may have nothing to do with each other. I just wanted to share them and hope somebody can relate in some way. These are also all the supposed paranormal things that have happened. Everything I can explain is ruled out. My mother is a strong believer in the paranormal and has claimed to have seen a lot of ducked up shit in her life. The most notable regarding me, though, is when I was a few months old. My mother had a dream of 3 women in white dancing in a field, but the dream filled her with terror, like some of the worst nightmares in the world. When she woke up, I was screaming my lungs out, and, despite previously only wanting to be held by her, I refused to get even slightly close for days afterwards. Some years later I'm going to math lessons. We lived in a very small town where the narrower streets were lined with houses, most of which appeared deserted, creating a terrifying atmosphere. Walking down that road a few times, my phone would ring displaying a blocked number, and when I picked up, no one answered. The most significant thing that happened on that road was one time I was walking home from the math lessons, and I saw a house. A bit unusual for the country, with these tall and thin oval windows at the front and a deck. On the deck was a woman on a rocking chair. I looked for a little bit as that house mesmerized me somehow. It got stuck in my head afterwards. I've always loved drawing, so when I got home I drew the house. My mom got home, and I showed her the drawing, and she liked it. I said I wanted to see the house again, and the next day I went, but the house was nowhere to be found. I was certain it existed, and so was my mom, so we went through all the small roads in the town just in case, but it didn't exist. My mom later told me she went on her own to look for it a couple of times after, but nothing. Fast forward some years, we moved to a different city and into an apartment. The walls were very thin, so we attributed all the sounds to neighbors, but something didn't add up. We would always hear the voices of the upstairs neighbors, but they constantly changed, and it always sounded like more than 10 people lived there, and the voices changed from adult to child, and even though we knew the neighbors personally and they were a family of 3, we chalked it up to them having guests constantly or something. Also, for the upwards of 4 years we lived there, we constantly heard construction, but nobody in the nearby apartments was doing anything, let alone for 4 years. The strangest experience was my mom and I hearing each other call us when neither of us was at home or calling. This one time was terrifying. I heard a very loud and distressed call. It was my mother's voice yelling my name especially. I ran in the hallway worried, only to be met by my mom, who claimed to have heard my voice yelling mom in the exact same manner. We tried to laugh it off, but we never really got over that instance because it was so unique. As a side note, since birth I have had trouble sleeping, never falling asleep before midnight even as a newborn, and have had terrible nightmares and sleep paralysis. If this is paranormal, my 2 explanations for any paranormal activity around me are that I've played around with a Ouija board a lot, and once when I was about 7, a group of upwards of 10 neighborhood kids and I found a grave, wooden cross stuck in the middle of a field, and, as decided by the older kids, tried to dig it up. We found nothing. I would appreciate anything you have to say about this. Can anyone help explain a strange event I experienced when I was 13? This event occurred when I was 13, about 23 years ago. Looking back, 13 was probably the worst version of myself. The previous few years had been a time of significant change. On top of the typical adolescent awkwardness, my home life was in upheaval. My mom left my dad when I was 11, and for a couple of years, it was just the 2 of us. I thrived during this period, excelling academically and socially. I was a happier kid. Then my mom met my current stepdad. They quickly became serious, and my mom was happy. However, he was cruel and made it clear he wanted her to himself. He'd tell me she didn't want me around, that she only pretended to love me. He only did this when she wasn't around. I knew she was happy, so I kept quiet. I started acting out and getting into fights, and my grades plummeted, and I turned to self-destructive behaviors. The unexplained event happened at the peak of this turmoil, right after my mom and stepdad eloped and he officially moved in. One night, they went out, leaving me alone. I had locked and deadbolted the doors, as I always did when home alone. I was stressed, having gotten in trouble at school and facing a week of in-school suspension. I decided to take a shower. I went to my room and grabbed some clothes before heading to the bathroom. As I was washing, my problems consumed me, leaving me feeling angry, frustrated. Upon exiting the shower, I discovered my room in a state of chaos. Both windows were unlocked and open, and the lights and TV were on. I felt a shock of fear, confusion, and the realization that something inexplicable was happening. It was an emotion that I don't think the English language has a word for, and it passed through my body like a bolt of lightning. This was impossible. I knew I was the only one home, and my room had been secure before my shower. I called my mom and asked her to come home. She told me to call the police. They arrived before she did, but when my stepdad suggested I did it for attention, they quickly closed the case. I'm not crazy, and I've never had delusions. Even though I was having trouble, I couldn't have done this on my own. I've never sensed a ghost in the house, so I don't think it was a haunting. My best conclusion, as strange as it sounds, is that my extreme stress manifested physically while I was showering and focusing on my problems. I've always felt like this is what happened. Is that even possible? Is that something known to occur, particularly with adolescent girls? Being in that in-between stage seems to have potent mental energy. As weird as it sounds, it's always been my explanation. What do you guys think? My cupcake story. Definitely a glitch in the matrix we call life. I still to this day have no explanation for what happened that night, and it's not a story I share often. It's also really silly, because it's about a damn cupcake, but unexplainable. I am now 31 and still think about this. It happened when I was around 17. My friend and I had just left a party, and I took a cupcake with me for the road. We wanted to be rebellious teens and hop the fence of the local public pool and smoke some weed on the diving board with our feet in the water. I thought that would be a perfect time to have my cupcake. And so we set out on our journey on foot to the pool a few blocks away. Everything was going great. Smoking a joint with my best friend on a warm summer night, feet in the water splashing about. I still have my cupcake in hand and I'm anticipating eating it. Then a cop pulls up. We, of course, book it to the other side of the fence to make a run for it. I suddenly realized I have a cupcake in my hand and can't climb the fence with one hand. I'm devastated and have a whole 10-second conversation with my friend about the cupcake and how to get over the fence with it. She climbs first, and I hand it to her, etc. Cupcake was too big to fit through the fence. We made the decision to chuck it. I threw it in the water. We both saw me throw the cupcake into the water. I heard it splash. I climbed the fence, and we both laughed at the cupcake floating in the pool. We ran cheerfully down the road as we avoided the cop and finished most of the joint. We were feeling good. We walk a few blocks, and I realize the cupcake is in my hand. I stop dead in my tracks and show my friend, who starts flipping the duck out. Then I flip the duck out. It was a mix of us laughing and also being extremely freaked out as to how this is even possible. Yes, we were high. No, we did not drink at the party. And yes, I'm 100% sure I threw the cupcake in the pool. I physically could not have climbed that fence with one hand. We had an entire conversation about losing the cupcake I had been hoarding for an hour to save for after the joint. It was a tragedy to us Lamau. Realizing the cupcake was in my hand 15 minutes after I had thrown it. To this day I sit and think about this. I ran into my old friend randomly a year ago at a bar, and it came up. We had a serious talk about it now that we're adults, and we both remembered the whole thing vividly. Just a very bizarre thing. So I've actually witnessed like dozens of unexplainable paranormal encounters. Both of my grandmother's houses were super haunted. Every member of the families had their own creepy experiences. It was just second nature in those parts. My personal 3 most terrifying. We were staying with a family friend, an old lady who lived by herself in one of the oldest houses in the neighborhood. Beautiful wood. Stained glass windows. But within a few minutes of our arrival, she discloses to us that her house is incredibly haunted and to expect insane levels of paranormal activity. Then she left us to house sit while she went on a trip to LA. Before she leaves, she tells us the house was built on sacred burial ground that natives used to bury their dead on. Great. My mom is very intrigued. She decides we should do our own investigation. I wish I had the video. We walked all throughout the house in pitch black darkness, except for a flashlight, and Mom asked questions to empty, silent air. Afterwards it seemed like a bust. We watched the video and could clearly see the shadow figure of what looks to be a very large, built man following and walking with us. Our family friend was named Vicky. Mom asked in the video, "Do you know Vicky?" Clear as day. A man's kind voice responds. He chuckled and replied, "Yes, I do." From that point on, Mom got violently sick with something and was confined to the bathroom downstairs by the kitchen. She was vomiting and had a migraine and whole body aches. My good friend and her little brother lived right across the street. I also have a little brother his age. We sit the boys on the couch by the kitchen and let them watch some shows while my friend and I begin to cook soup for my mom. Bone broth, garlic, onions, and salt, healthy stuff we had in the house. All of a sudden, every single light on the downstairs first floor bursts and turns off. My friend and I whipped our necks toward each other and both had eyes full of debilitating fear. Not a second longer passes before the window facing the backyard is suddenly slammed, loudly, angrily, by what seems like two hands. The window was slammed 3 times, bang bang bang. We quickly ran to the couch with our brothers and hid them under a blanket. After 15 minutes, I got the courage to get up and try to turn a light on. Every single light had been turned off by the switches. Flipped down instead of up. Lamp strings pulled down. Every switch was manually turned off. That scared the shit out of me. My friend decided to take her brother home to their house across the street. So then I was left basically home alone since Mom was bathroom confined. I had one of those old Android tablets and would play Temple Run. I sat in the living room with the TV on loud and played Temple Run like my life depended on it. The living room faced the kitchen. I was hearing very loud and unmistakably activity coming from the dark, unoccupied kitchen that sounded like metal pots and pans banging excessively. Ignored it and kept playing Temple Run. Then, again unmistakably, a large, heavy pair of boots began walking through the kitchen and then toward me. I ignored it. The boots circled me many times. I was so frozen in fear besides the Temple Run. Then, I start to hear music in an adjacent room, but it sounded very old and classic and like it'd be played on a turntable. Then voices, many voices, moved around that room, to the entryway, the kitchen, and the dining area, even close enough to my couch that I heard a woman clear as day say, "That girl on the couch is playing with that box." Scared me so bad. I've lived very few nights throughout my life filled with so much fear and no sleep at all. Unexplained experience, open to all ideas and similar experiences. This is long, I'm trying to not leave out any detail that may be important, or not. To start out, I've never had something like this happen before, and I hope to never have it happen again. However, I am very curious about the incident and would appreciate any insights or similar experiences from others. At the time of this event, I had been living in my house for about 4 years without any concerns or strange feelings. I was 2 years into a divorce, not sure if that matters, but he hadn't been in the house in over a year, court ordered. The house was large and had a main living area, 5 bedrooms/5+ baths, along with a basement and law suite that was basically an independent apartment. It had its own external entry/exit, kitchen, bathroom, laundry, bedrooms, etc. The house is located in the country, lots of land and very few neighbors, only one house can be seen from any point on that house. Since the beginning of the divorce, when my ex was legally not allowed to be on/around the property, I have had friends who have moved in with me in the house. That's a story for a different day, but these ladies are now some of my absolute closest friends that I will cherish forever. Anyway, that's the background. The night this happened, my almost 18-year-old daughter had a couple girlfriends over, and my son, almost a teenager, had a couple guy friends over as well. They were all asleep during the incident and don't remember feeling anything off prior to or after it. My BFF and her boyfriend were in the in-law suite area for the night, as was typical for most weekends. The suite has a walkout concrete patio with patio chairs, a fire pit, speakers, etc. I chatted with my BFF around 7 p.m. and then headed out to the bar with a couple of friends. She and her boyfriend stayed at the house per norm, enjoying the time to themselves. I ended up getting back to the house around 3 a.m. with one of my guy's friends driving his truck, who was at the house frequently during that time. Anyway, we pull up the drive, windows down, music blaring, just enjoying the night. Pulling up to the garage, I hop out of the truck and use the keypad on the side to open the garage door. He and I are just bullshitting outside of his truck, but not in the garage, while he finishes a cigarette. Very suddenly everything around us becomes silent, no crickets, no frogs, no wind noise, absolutely silent. Honestly, we don't notice at all, and only after thinking back through it does it really pop into my memory as more of a subconscious thought than something I really noticed. Anyway, I hear a strange noise that seems to be coming from the end of my pole barn, which is about 80 feet behind me. I honestly couldn't even describe the sound because I wasn't paying attention, and it was just a noise on a night where I didn't expect to hear any sounds. I told the guy I was with to stop talking for a moment so we could listen and determine if the sound I heard was real or just my imagination. Obviously, having just come back from the bar, I was a bit buzzed, lol. The next thing I hear is the sound of a baby crying, closer than the original sound, maybe 50 versus 80. It was obvious and clearly identifiable as an infant cry. We both heard it distinctly. At that exact moment I felt an absolute, immediate sense of fear and dread. I felt as though I would die if I remained in that spot. I've never felt such an instinctual sense of impending death in my life. I cannot begin to explain it, but if you've ever experienced it, you'll never forget. I made my guy friend toss his cigarette, dragged him into the house, and closed and locked the garage door and the door from the house to the garage while turning off every light / pulling every blind we passed until we were upstairs, and I checked on all the kiddos, who were all sleeping. After checking every additional window / door in the main house to be sure everything was locked / blinds down, I finally was able to relax a little. My dude friend confirmed he heard the same thing but wasn't nearly as concerned as I was. He fell asleep pretty quickly, but I couldn't until I saw the sun start to come up over the back of the property. Around 11 a.m., my best friend, who, again, was staying in the in-law suite in my basement with her very buff, manly ex-military boyfriend that night, came up to my room as usual to chat about random topics and decide what we would make for brunch for the still sleeping kids. She sat down on the side of my bed and was like, "Girl, I had the weirdest thing happen to me last night. I almost don't even want to tell you because you're going to think I'm crazy." I was in total shock, so I just sat in my bed, probably with a stupid, dumbfounded look on my face, unable to say anything at first, while she told me about what happened to her the previous night. She was outside with the BF listening to music, patio lights on, drinking, and smoking cigarettes when they both heard a weird sound. Neither could really describe what the sound was apart from something they didn't expect to hear. As they focused on the sound, she said it sounded like something running through tall grass at a high speed but also super close at the same time. Tall grass was over 150 away. While they both could hear it, neither one could see anything coming towards them. She said they both felt the exact same overwhelming feeling of impending death / dread, and her BF yelled at her to get in the house now. They both ran into the in-law suite, locked the patio doors, and pulled the curtains. Nothing else happened. To the best of our ability to piece together a timeline, her instance occurred first, followed by mine, with both happening within 30 minutes of each other. I hope to never feel that way again, but I also want to try to figure out what that was. I know what I think it was, although some of it doesn't match up with lore, so I'm also open to other ideas / thoughts. I remained at that house for an additional year with no additional incidents. I think this was just something passing through, not hunting but willing to take easy prey. This feeling also doesn't align with the lore, but that's my gut instinct. What say you? A few actually come to mind. I'll just share a couple. I once woke up next to my wife, who'd been awake for a bit reading, and I just stayed cozy in bed chatting with her and resting my eyes a bit still. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw a clear image of a bedroom in the exact layout as our actual one, except it was an entirely different house, different bed frame, paint job, hallway outside the door, etc. Whenever I opened or closed my eyes, it was like the whole environment changed seamlessly. I was awake enough that I started telling my wife what was going on. It became super trippy, though, and I ended up quickly sitting up and forcing myself to keep my eyes open because it started to feel like I wasn't sure which was real and whether I was actually awake or dreaming this whole experience. I was in fact awake, but it took some effort to finally anchor myself in reality that morning. Another experience I had also relates to dreaming. I lucid dream sometimes but once had what I can only describe as a parallel universe dream. In the dream, I was moving into a house with my wife, and some family was helping with the move. But it was very weird. My wife was somebody else completely. My cousins were the same but had different spouses and kids than in real life. After we unloaded the truck and my family left, my wife and I started talking. She had apparently noticed a while before the setting in the dream that I was a different version of myself than the version of me she had loved and married. I opened up and basically explained I wasn't sure what was going on but that I was from somewhere else. I told her about my actual wife and kid. We started planning logistics, like what I'd do for work, because my education and training are very different from what Dream Me did. The dream ended up being very tragic, really. She was upset and worried because she loved the me she married, but I wasn't him. And I have a great relationship with my wife and daughter, so I was worried I'd never see them again. So we were basically confiding in each other about all this and planning for the possibility that I might actually be stuck there with her. It was all very weird, Like much longer and way more coherent than any other dream I remember experiencing before. And after waking up, it was as if I retained some residual feelings that dream me felt for that woman. Like, for quite some time I couldn't stop thinking about her and wondering how she was doing. I was glad to be back with my real wife and daughter, but I also felt a deep melancholy for a couple of weeks whenever I thought about her, as if I missed this other wife. It was particularly unusual because I only recall that one dream involving her, yet the sense of sadness and longing for her felt much more intense than was reasonable. It felt like a deep ache, as if I were missing someone I had truly loved deeply. Thinking about it still stirs something in me, but not as intensely as it did right after the dream. Can anyone help me understand what happened to me? This was about 4 years ago. I was in college, staying in an apartment on campus. I was talking to a guy, who ended up being tremendously violent during our relationship, just in case that's relevant. We talked until dawn in my apartment because we were in that will we, won't we phase. Once we decided it was late and he should go home, I walked him outside to his car. While we were in the parking lot, we made some light goodbye chatter that was interrupted by the sound of barking dogs. Like a lot of dogs. It sounded like thousands, maybe. We both jumped and looked all around us to source the horrifying roar that was ripping through the air to the point where we couldn't even hear each other. Let me be clear, whatever this was, it was a horde. Barking over each other, getting louder and more aggressive, turning almost into howls, like a war cry. It kept getting closer until it felt like whatever this was would surely be on us in a second, and then it stopped all at once. An expectancy of a resolution hung in the air until we both heard each other's breath again and asked if the other was okay and if we heard the same things. The whole situation was only about 12 to 15 seconds, but it felt like the barking and howling took so long to all stop at the same time at its loudest, closest point. I cannot find anything like this experience from people I know or the internet, and it's plagued me since it happened. I asked other people in my complex if they heard anything at all, and most of them were asleep, but a few people who were awake said they only heard some cars passing and maybe some distant chatter at times. My best friend, we are 19 and 21, has a sister that is now 3 years old. There have been many instances, some for which I was present, where my friend's little sister, let's call her A, has said some very unexplained and frightening things. When she was just learning to talk, she learned the word daddy early on. She knew that her father was the one called daddy, but she also called pretty much every other middle-aged man in her family or of the people that we saw in public daddy. One day, we were in the basement of my friend's house playing with A. We were facing one direction, and A was facing the other way. Suddenly, she put down the toy she was playing with and pointed behind us, smiling, and said, "Daddy." We turned around, and there was, of course, no one there. We dismissed it as a child's imagination, however, I continued to bring it up repeatedly. She kept trying to get our attention and point out the man called Daddy that she was seeing behind us. She even tried to grab our hands and lead us there to show us, as it was obvious that we weren't understanding her. Her father was not even in the home at this time, and it was just my friend, A, and me in the house. A little bit later, when her speech was improving and she could say more words, but not speak in full sentences to explain things to us, we were playing with A in the backyard. She must be 3 by now, or just a little younger than that. My friend lives in the country, there are not many neighbors or traffic of people through her area. Her backyard faces a cornfield. A was playing by herself for a bit in the sandbox, and we were watching her but also having our conversation and letting her play by herself for a bit. 1 minute she was fine and happy and playing nicely, then suddenly, she was running towards us looking terrified and crying. She points to her knee and shows us an open wound that looks like she had fallen and scraped her knee. When we asked what happened, she pointed towards the sandbox/direction of the cornfield and repeatedly said, "Old lady, old lady, old lady." There was, of course, no one in the yard. We took her in to clean the wound, and my friend and A's mom asked what happened. Again, I was trying to explain something to an old lady, but she didn't have the capacity to form full sentences or explain things, so it was confusing, and we couldn't fully grasp what she meant. We forgot about it and figured it was something she made up. A few weeks later, my friend and I were in her basement, and her mom and A were playing upstairs. All of a sudden her mom ran down and seemed frantic. Apparently she was playing with A upstairs when suddenly A broke into a sobbing fit, terrified, and pointed to the window, screaming, "Old lady, old lady, old lady." Another unusual occurrence, albeit the least significant example of strange activity, was a photo of A that shows a strange light next to her face. It isn't a lens flare and looks strange. It's difficult to explain. I realize this sounds strange and will cause skepticism, but I have no explanation for these events, and they definitely left a bad taste in my mouth. I was riding in a car with some friends after a high school party. No one had been drinking. I grew up on a farm on a reservation, so we had about a 20-minute drive from the party to home along lots of empty fields and pastures. I was in the back seat, and we had the radio on, and nobody was talking. I noticed out in the distance, maybe 300 yards, a weird greenish light that was keeping pace with the car. I looked away from the window to see how fast we were going, 50 miles per hour. I turned back to look at the light, and it was now about half as far away. It was still keeping pace with the car, and there seemed to be movement within the light. And it wasn't like it was a bright light. It was more like a glow stick light, but much bigger. I turned my head back to see if anyone else was looking, but only the driver and I were still awake. The driver was my friend's older brother. I didn't know him well, but he was a smartass. I wasn't about to tell him I saw a light off in the distance. I'd never hear the end of it. I turned back to the light. It was even closer now. Less than 100 feet. The movement in the light was easier to make out, a person, running fast. I couldn't tell much else. The glow obscured the details. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but it was running like crazy and just looking straight ahead, hurdling fences like they were nothing. I glanced away and looked at the speedometer again, between 55 and 60. I looked back again at the figure, who would now once again have the distance between us. I'm still running and hurdling fences. It definitely seemed to be a man, but it was hard to make out much more of the details. But I could tell where his eyes were, because he was now looking at me without breaking stride. He was jumping fences while staring directly into my eyes. The car slowed a bit as we went around a curve that now had us going almost 45 degrees off from the direction we had been, and I watched the glowing man continue on his path, which now diverged from mine, and he disappeared into the darkness. After I got home that night, having told no one what I had thought I had seen, because I would rather not be known as Ghost Boy at school on Monday, I went to bed and fell pretty quickly to sleep. At some point I dreamed the exact events I had experienced on the road, except that, in the dream, we didn't veer off, and we got progressively faster. We stayed parallel to the runner, as I now refer to him, and each time I looked away and looked back, he was half as far as he had been before until he was running right next to the car. And he never took his eyes off me. It was still difficult to see his features. His eyes I could see because he was staring straight at me, and then I became aware of his mouth because it moved into kind of a smirk, at which point he raised one hand and placed one finger in front of his mouth, giving me a silent shush gesture, and that is when I woke up, making a sound that was half a gasp and half a short yell. And I didn't go back to sleep that night. I never had the dream again. I never saw the runner again. But I didn't tell anyone about him for years, until one day I was sharing ghost stories with some coworkers at a party, and I told them about my experience. They were freaked out. I was a little freaked out later, too, even though I don't believe in ghosts, the supernatural, or alien visitations to Earth. A part of me wondered if there might be consequences for breaking the shush order. There weren't. And there have never been, and I've told the story a few more times in the nearly 40 years since I saw the runner. I don't have a theory as to what it was. I am certain I didn't imagine him. But I can't explain him, either. When I was a kid, probably 5 to 6 years old, I would stay at my grandparents' house, and I would be in bed, and I remember getting out of bed and going to the top of the basement stairs, and there would be people on the side of the stairs in white, and they would tell me to jump and not to be afraid, and I would jump and float down the stairs, and they would basically make sure I didn't fall until I got to the bottom, and then they would help me back up, and I would end up in my bed, and it wasn't a dream. Sometimes I would end up in my room, and sometimes my grandparents would find me in the basement. And I told them the people downstairs told me to come here. I have no idea what that means, but I know it was not a dream, and I wasn't sleepwalking. I saw those people clear as a bell. Bizarre. True story. Years ago I moved into a very old farmhouse-style house on a small holding. My first evening there, this happened. My partner walked into our bedroom carrying a chair from the bar area of the house. The house was halfway furnished. And as my partner walked into the bedroom with the chair, I saw this old lady sitting on top of it. At the same moment, my cat jumped off the bed, hissed, and then hid under it, refusing to come out. That evening I fell asleep and woke up sometime during the night, but I was paralyzed. This was not sleep paralysis. I was completely awake. This woman was sitting on my chest, shaking me awake, saying, "Get up and run, or they will kill you." I somehow managed to get up, peered through the side of the curtain, and saw a group of people busy breaking into our house. Called the local response team and got it sorted. The next night, the same thing happened with the woman, but nobody was trying to break in that night. So I didn't think much of the incident the second time, even though she warned me that I should leave the house because something was going to happen. Fast forward to one day several months later, I walked around the massive property and ventured into the surrounding field and other small holdings with my dog. We walked past a row of graves, not a graveyard, but literally some random bodies of who knows who buried just at the bottom of our fence line. Suddenly the sky above is darkened, and the dog freaks out like crazy. I felt this force coming in, and every instinct in my body screamed, WTF. The sky suddenly darkened as if a storm was imminent, even though there had not been a single cloud visible moments before. Suddenly this massive hand, like 4 meters long, extended out of the sky and came straight towards us. The dog bolted. I bolted with the dog. Despite all of these strange events, including the ghost lady who warned me about the first break-in and then again about my impending death, I still told myself that this was somehow nothing. Fast forward, about 2 weeks after this graveyard incident, a group of people broke into our property and proceeded to chase us down. We had to climb our own electric fence to escape. We didn't see the intruders coming until they were literally at our door, and then we just ran. They proceeded to chase us. We ran into the open field, finally found a tar road, all farm roads and dirt roads in that area, and on that tar road, we found a patrolling police van. At one stage I had to climb over a wired fence, so I was wearing torn shorts, no shirt, and only a bra. I was covered in blood, cuts, wounds, etc. The police locked us in their van, refused to get us medical assistance, and literally took us back to the scene of the crime and left. We moved the next day. I still remember that old ghost lady, and I still want to know how she knew this was going to happen. But that ghost, well, she kind of saved my life. Not a hunter, but growing up in Wisconsin, I was the minority. Growing up in the woods, I was connected with the earth and nature, animals, etc. I knew from a very young age I was not alone in the woods. Having free rein at 8 years old, I explored my world and was not afraid of it. It was not uncommon to cross paths with deer, bears, coyotes, wolves, and even a mountain lion once. Usually, when I was by myself on my bike or cross-country skis, I would encounter a bear, deer, or coyote on the trail. I would stop and watch very quietly and just wait until they made their way. More than a handful of times we would just lock eye contact and just be there in the woods together. Still to this day one of my favorite things. Fast forward to my late 20s, my future wife and I were living on 12 acres of beautiful forest with an open field. I gave my wife's old friend permission to hunt on our land. His new wife was pregnant and huge. He was hunting a deer to feed his family. His whole philosophy was to have the most powerful, accurate rifle to have the cleanest, most humane shot possible. He invited me to join him on his hunt. I had never hunted but thought if I ever needed to feed my family, it would be good to learn how to gut and clean it. So I agreed, and we were out hiking to a good spot before dawn. I allowed my friend to proceed with his actions while I quietly followed about 5 yards behind him. He found his spot on a tree stump and told me to stay behind him and let him know if I saw anything and that this could take all day. So I stood back about 10 yards. I closed my eyes, and in my mind's eye, I connected with the land, calling out and inviting the deer that had been born to feed my friend, his new wife, and their soon-to-be baby. Immediately in my mind's eye there was this deer, so real and vivid, still just standing in front of me in my mind's eye. Like the many times since childhood I communed with this deer. I thanked the deer for sacrificing its life for my friend, as its energy and sustenance would nourish their little baby and help it grow. I felt the deepest honor and respect for the life that was offered. It was intensely real. When I opened my eyes, the deer from my mind was standing 10 yards in front of me, looking me in the eyes. I whispered, "PSSSSTTT, there's a deer over here." He turned around on his stump. He took aim and fired one shot, which went clean through the deer's heart. He said that was the easiest hunt he'd ever had. We'd been there maybe 10 minutes. It was one of the most beautiful commune with nature experiences I've ever had. I wanted to share some of my strangest paranormal experiences with you. So, I wanted to tell you guys some of my strangest paranormal experiences that I had in my life. As a 25-year-old man, these stories had truly made me believe that supernatural powers exist. These are real stories that I have experienced throughout my 25-year-old life. I'm a Christian, and I was baptized when I was 1 year old. Story 1. In August 2017, my best friend Brian died tragically in a road incident. He was only 17 by then, the same age as mine in 2017, and I was really shocked by this. This happens in 2018. I was hanging out with one of my closest friends then, Vladimir. It was May of 2018. We were having a walk in our neighborhood. We were talking about various topics. At one moment, we started speaking about Brian. He told me a stunning story. He stated that in November 2017 he wanted to take a walk to Brian's home, for some unknown reasons. When he reached the front of his apartment building, he started remembering some of his best moments with him. This made him burst uncontrollably into tears. It was around 3 a.m. After a moment of grief, he had looked in the glass of the entrance door, and he had frozen. He said that he saw the reflection of Brian's face, having no eyes and having blood all over his face, looking straight at him. Vladimir had started running, and he is still traumatized to this day, 8 years later. When he told me that story, I was not sure if I was able to believe him, but I started thinking, and I said to him, what if this was a sign? A sign to show you that he is still with us on the earth? Brian was not baptized to my acknowledgement. Then we started commenting on that, and I said, I'm wondering if he will show me some kind of sign too. Then we had a little talk. We were right in front of my apartment building where I lived. It was time to go to my home. It was 12 a.m. So I had said bye to him, and I had reached out to my left pocket, where I always leave my keys. But then, I felt something strange in my keys. I took them out from my pocket, and I froze. The key to my apartment door had been bent. The key had been made with reinforced metal, and bending it would require inhumane force. I had never dropped down my key on a rock or something like that. I had called Vladimir's name, since he was around 100 meters away from me, and he came back. I said nothing and showed him the key. He made a very scared look on his face and was speechless. He turned around, and he walked away. During the night, I was constantly hearing footsteps in my room and feeling like something was sitting on the corner of my bed. This was my first experience with supernatural powers. Story 2. I had just finished my last grade in my school in 2019. It was summer, and I was hanging out with a girl named Carolina. She was telling me about the supernatural sightings that she had. The story goes. Since 2012, she had been living in an old apartment, where there were rumors that the previous owner had ended himself. Since she had moved in, she was constantly hearing footsteps and whispers and feeling like somebody had been watching her. Furthermore, she had shown me her selfie that she had taken in 2015, where a foggy, elderly figure was staring at her in the back. She told me that she got used to it anyway. But on that summer day in 2019, she asked me if I wanted to experience these things myself. I had agreed, and we headed over to her apartment. She invited me in, and we sat in the kitchen. Before that, she walked me through all of the rooms so I could make sure that no one else was there except me and her. We started talking on various topics when, after 20 minutes, the door behind me slammed. I had jumped from my seat, and I got scared. She was sitting unbothered and told me, "This is just the beginning." After 10 minutes, we heard a knocking coming from the wardrobe in the restroom. We got to the room to investigate. I had opened all of the doors on her wardrobe just to make sure that no one was there, and I was right, no one was there. After that, we came back in the kitchen, and a cold wind came to my neck. No windows were opened. This story had hyped even more my interest in the supernaturalistic topics. Well, that's it. I hope that you liked my 2 stories. Seeing unexplainable figures. It started a week ago. I was cleaning my bike on my porch and saw a head/figure quickly jerk back out of view from my line of sight. I saw this out of my peripheral vision, so it was hard to make out. I took a few steps back and pointed my headlight at the roof only to see nothing. I did not think much of it and waved it off as a lack of sleep. 2 days after this encounter I had just woken up, and it was around 6:30 in the morning. The light was shining into my bedroom, and then it happened again. I saw a black figure around 4 feet tall run barely within view of my line of sight. I quickly got up from lying down just to see nothing. I thought it was possibly my German Shepherd, but he would have made noise. This figure was completely silent. Now fast forwarding to last night, I was dozing off to sleep when I saw a taller figure, maybe 6 feet, run past my doorway. This one spooked me the most because I had a direct line of sight to it and did not wave it off. The strange thing I can't understand is that I was not asleep during any of these experiences. Since last night, I have not seen anything else. I once visited a haunted church. It was told to me by someone who had been there before on a sort of ghost hunt that it was children haunting the church. This place was built in the late 1700s or early 1800s and has a small cemetery out front. Some of the graves were simply marked infant. This person told me that they had gotten responses when they asked the ghost to play hide and seek. I ended up going, and after experiencing something opening a door, footsteps came out and then ran back, and the door slammed shut. I said something like, "You don't have to be afraid. Come play hide and seek with us." That night I started to get a really sore feeling in the back of my neck. It just kept getting worse. The only way to describe it is as if I had been carrying something heavy around my neck, and the strain of it was causing pain to increase slowly over time. It started to creep up my neck into the back of my skull, and I was getting a dull but intense headache. Eventually we decided to leave. As we drove away, about a block from the church, suddenly, all at once, the pain, stiffness, and feeling of weight around my neck just lifted. It was gone. I felt completely fine and was thankful, but didn't really think anything of it other than being happy that my neck felt better. At that time I was a smoker. If you've ever smoked, you know smokers tend to always know where their cigarettes are. That night when I got home, I did what I did every time I got home. I took my keys, wallet, cigarettes, and lighter out of my pockets and set them on top of my TV stand in a small bowl that I used for only those things and spare change so that I always knew where they would be when I needed them. Then I took off my jacket and turned around to toss it over a chair in my room. I wanted a cigarette and immediately turned back around to grab them and my lighter from the bowl. The cigarettes were gone. I was somewhat baffled, as there was no way they could have fallen out of the bowl. If they had somehow, I would have heard the pack hit the floor. Even so, I looked all around the area. The bowl rested on my TV stand, so I looked behind it and under it. I even looked under my bed in case it did fall and slide across the room. I looked everywhere. Suddenly I flashed back in my mind to that moment that I said, "Come play hide and seek with us," and that feeling of pain/weight around my neck. It was like the memory of it slapped me in the face. Now this is where it gets weird, and I swear to God this happened. The only thing I could think of was that in asking it to play and welcoming its presence, it had latched onto me and maybe followed me home. I stared into the bowl that did not contain my cigarettes anymore. I closed my eyes and said out loud, "Okay, real funny. I don't want to play anymore. I would really like my cigarettes back. I need them back." I opened my eyes, and they were sitting in the bowl, right in front of me, the exact place I had put them when I walked in. The place they were not seconds prior. The place they had not been for the last 10 minutes of me looking for them. I have zero explanation for this. Now this was not the only instance of this. About a week later I went to a friend's house, and again my cigarettes, it was always the cigarettes, disappeared. I had not told him of the previous experience. I had 2 packs. One that was almost empty, maybe 4 to 5 left, and a full pack in my jacket. I walked into his room, set my cigarettes and lighter on the end table by my seat, walked out, and set my jacket over the back of the couch in the living room. When I came back in, my cigarettes were gone. I asked him if he took them, and he always had a full carton of his own and just looked confused as to why I'd even ask and said, "No, man, I have my own smokes, why would I take yours?" He helped me look all around the table and the chair I'd sit in. We looked under things everywhere for a good 5 minutes. Eventually I said, "Duck it, I have a full pack in my jacket." I grabbed that and smoked off that one that night. When I finally left for the night, I had that full pack and did one final look around, still not finding the nearly empty one, and then used the bathroom. When I came out of the bathroom, he just looked up and pointed to the end table I had originally set the first pack on. "Hey, don't forget your cigarettes, you don't want to lose 2 packs." My mouth dropped as I reached into my pocket and pulled out the full pack. His mouth dropped, and he mouthed, "What the duck?" When he too realized that the pack I had lost, that he helped me search for, was suddenly back exactly where I had placed it hours ago. He was not ducking with me. I then told him about the previous experience in my home the night of the ghost hunt, and I could visibly see chills run down his spine. He basically pushed me out as fast as he could, saying he didn't want me bringing anything like that into his home. When I got home I parked in my driveway. I was about to get out of my vehicle, but before I went inside, I said out loud, "Okay, it's been fun, but I really don't want to play anymore. You need to stop. You are scaring people." It never happened again. It's something I cannot explain, nor do I really think about it anymore, and I always found it incredibly odd. Did they physically move, or did they simply disappear and then reappear? Was there a pack of cigarettes floating across the room into a hiding spot and then back again? Or did they simply vanish and reappear? What exactly happened? I wish I knew. This one's got some backstory. When I first met my ex-husband, he lived in this oldish house, 1970s, balls deep in the county, like 30 minutes from a functional town area. I had a borzoi at the time, and he'd always aggressively bark in one particular area of the yard, right around the right front end of the house. This was particularly unnerving because borzois generally do not bark, and I had only heard him bark 3 or 4 times before that. There was always a noise in the house that sounded like keys jingling or a dog's collar when they shake, but never in the same room. Sometimes it'd be across the house, sometimes it'd be in the same room as me. And it wasn't my dog because sometimes he'd be in the room with me, and it would intrigue him too. One night my ex-husband went outside to get something, and he heard a noise that he described as a garden hose set to shower aimed at the ground in the area my dog was always barking. He went to see what it was, and there was nothing, but the sound was clear as day, as if there was literally someone watering the grass right in front of him. Then the noise started moving. The noise started tracing the perimeter of the house, and he followed it until it reached halfway around, at which point it suddenly took off very fast towards the woods at the back of the property. Maybe a month later, I was lying in bed, and my dog walked into the room. His gaze shifts from me to the area between the bed and the nightstand, and his posture gets defensive. Head forward, lips tight, stiff as a board, etc. I look where he's looking, and I see nothing. Then he starts creeping forward and growling, eyes wild like he's about to fight something. Again, I really did not like that because borzoi are very cat-like. The only time they'd ever turn aggressive is if they're personally threatened or spooked. Then he springs forward and starts snapping at the air while growling, like he's trying to grab an invisible person. Another couple months go by, and my ex and I are lying in bed, the room is dark, and he's sound asleep. Suddenly he jolts awake, making panic noises and flailing around like he's trying to fling something off of him. I ask if he's okay, and there's no answer, he's just breathing heavily and looking around for something. I ask what's going on, and he still doesn't respond, but now I notice he's staring at something just off the edge of the bed beside him. I follow where he's looking, and right in the corner where the nightstand meets his side of the bed, there's a human face. At first I thought my ex had frozen up like that because it was a home invasion and he had a weapon pushed onto him or something, but then I realized the face wasn't real. I wonder how to describe it. Like I could see it, but it was like looking at your face in the reflection of your phone screen. There wasn't really much color to it, and there was something off about the 3D-ness and opacity of it. Also, there was no body or neck, it was literally just a head and face positioned as if someone invisible sans their head was kneeling beside the bed watching us. I just stared at this thing in silent shock over my ex's shoulder for probably 30 seconds, I was too scared to even blink. Eventually I flung the blanket over my head, curled into a ball, and retreated to the corner of the bed furthest from the face. My ex realized then that I'd seen it too and bolted up to get the light, but it vanished with the dark. It's been nearly a decade, but I can still remember it so vividly that I could 110% pick him out of a crowd. He was maybe 45-ish with long, dark, straight hair that was messy and had a wide bandana thing around his forehead. He looked like some sort of Native American. He had a long, skinny face with prominent cheekbones, no facial hair, and almond-shaped dark eyes. Only one has scared me so badly that even thinking of typing this made my feet all sweaty. A little background: we live near a forest with plentiful wildlife, have a dog, have a high fenced yard, have neighbors on 3 sides, and my daughter is fairly comfortable with the wildlife that eventually ends up in our yard. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits. My daughter was 7, a quiet, cheerful, factual kind of kid. She wasn't one to make a big deal of anything, she just liked to study things and took things in stride. One evening I heard this noise from downstairs, where she was playing, like she was hissing at something. By the time I stood up, it had changed to this shrieking, screaming, gasping cry. After the initial sound, I wasn't even sure it was her. I'd never heard her this upset, and I'm her mother. It rooted me to the floor. Movement was not an option. She came tearing up the stairs on all 4s, flipping half over and screaming at something behind her. She crawled up my body and was clawing at me and screaming, "Kill it. Don't let it hurt me, mommy. Hide. Jump out the window." In this hoarse voice of absolute terror that I've not heard before and never hope to hear again. While she was screaming in my face, I backed into the bathroom and slammed my back against the closed door from the inside. She covered her mouth and mine, and seconds later I heard what was very obviously a large animal or very heavy and stinky person coming up the stairs, pausing to breathe loudly and brush the wall and rail for a moment. I shoved a hand with a towel in her mouth to muffle the sound of her sobbing like I had never seen. It went into the room at the furthest end of the hall, and I took my chance. The master bathroom has a small opera window over our back porch. I slid it open, popped the screen out, and wedged my daughter through sideways and held her hands while she lowered onto the roof. She is terrified of heights and would have never done it if she wasn't mindlessly scared. I told her to scooch against the wall tight and jump if she heard me in trouble. I'm only inches wider, but I couldn't fit. It didn't matter anyway, because the animal bumped into the bathroom door with enough force to partially open it. I braced my feet against the wall in front of us. It let off and made its way down the stairs. I'd pulled my phone out to call, I don't know, anyone, and realized the buttons were set on a tone and had stopped dialing while it was on the stairs. The whole ordeal lasted 11 minutes. We waited another half hour. I called my neighbor to walk around the half of his house facing ours and tell us if he saw anything. Nothing. I asked him to please grab a gun or any type of weapon and either come over or call someone for help. I asked him to have whoever came in yell a specific word when they came in so we'd know it was safe. My daughter begged him, with his gun, to carry her downstairs. A man she barely knew. Neither of them could tell what kind of animal was in our house. Our dog wouldn't come in for days. This was several years ago, and my daughter refuses to be downstairs alone in any house. She won't speak of it. She refused to even play her favorite video game, even now, because the thought makes her sick. The odd part is that when the neighbor came over, he had to manipulate a window frame to unlatch the short pin lock and crawl in because, as always, the doors were closed and locked. Whatever animal it was had been in the house with us for at least 2 hours while we had dinner and chatted before I went upstairs to shower. That sounds simple enough, but it wasn't until later that I realized my home had been invaded earlier in the day and that whoever came in must have left a door open. They had taken away a few $1,000s worth of tools. Undeniable, 5 true UFO encounters. 1 UFO landing at South Hill, Virginia. On the evening of April 21, 1967, Clifton Crowder was driving along Farrell Road to his home in South Hill, Virginia, when he noticed a shiny silver craft landed on the street in front of him. As he flicked on his high beams, the craft emitted a stream of flames and took off like a bullet, straight up. The craft was gone, but left behind was a noticeable burn mark on the road and 4 evenly spaced holes gouged into the macadam surface. He went straight to the police and reported the incident. Unknown to him, dozens of people in the area were reporting UFOs flying around at treetop level, including police officers, firemen, and various residents. UFO researchers converged on the case and declared it genuine. Project Blue Book was contacted, and they were unable to identify the craft and also labeled it an unexplained case. To this day, what landed on Farrell Road in South Hill, Virginia, remains a mystery. 2 UFO lands at Iowa Farm. It was around 10 p.m. on August 6, 1971, when Don Eade looked outside his home in Westgate, Iowa, and saw a brilliant flash in the sky, followed by a red-orange object, which dropped down into his neighbor's field. Unknown to Don, Mike Potritz, who lived a short distance away, also noticed the flash and the strange object. The next morning, both Don and Mike woke up early and went to investigate the farm of John Bantz, where they had seen the object come down. Together, joined by a member of the Bantz family, they found a 10-foot wide circle of burned vegetation, which was surrounded by 4 smaller circles placed evenly around the circumference. Unknown to any of them, 2 other people were driving near the area 2 hours before Don and Eade saw the UFO and were chased down the road by an unknown object. That year, and the next, there were many other UFO landings at farms all over Iowa. 3. The Colby, Kansas UFO landing. At 2 a.m., on August 19, 1972, John I. Calkins awoke to see UFOs swooping down over his home in the tiny town of Gem, Kansas. He immediately called the local police in nearby Colby, Kansas. Patrolman Paul Carter was sent to investigate, but before he could even get there, the police officer came upon a landed UFO right alongside the highway. He called for backup, and his fellow officer, Dennis Brown, arrived and watched the craft take off. He saw that the craft was heading for nearby Oakley and called their sheriff station. They came out and saw the UFO too. Meanwhile, they headed to John Calkins' home in Gem, and to their amazement, the UFOs were still there. Meanwhile, a flurry of calls flooded the Colby Sheriff Station. The UFOs flew around all night long. It would be an experience that convinced many people that UFOs are real. 4 missing time in Prince George. At 4:10 a.m. on January 5, 1977, 17-year-old Kirk Allure drove along Highway 16 outside of Prince George, Canada. He noticed an oncoming car, and at the same time, saw a strange red light zooming towards it. Suddenly, the object approached him, and he realized it was a UFO. His body became numb as his car radio filled with static, his headlights failed, and the engine died. The last thing he recalled was seeing the oncoming car come right at him, the UFO overhead, and then slamming on his brakes. He fell unconscious and woke up to find himself sitting in the passenger seat of his car. The other driver woke him up and told Kirk that he himself had also had missing time and woke up standing on the road outside his car. Kirk was sore for a week, had a persistent headache, and his car battery was dead. He and the other witness went to the hospital. Soon Kirk would have more experiences, and this time, he had more witnesses. 5. The Greenfield UFO landing. Around 7 p.m. on November 8, 1975, Kathy Wilfong and Cindy Bridges were at their farm in Greenfield, Indiana, when the power kept mysteriously going off. It happened 4 times before returning to normal. Then, 2 hours later, a huge UFO appeared over their soybean field. Their dog barked wildly, and they fled to their house and called the police. By the time the police arrived, the UFOs had moved off into the distance but were still visible. Meanwhile, calls flooded into the station from other people reporting on the UFOs. The next morning, Kathy and Cindy found a 44-foot wide circle of crushed vegetation, tightly woven and matted together. When they went public with their story, numerous other witnesses stepped forward to report their own sightings in that area on that same evening. Some extremely weird, unexplainable happenings are going on in my house, and they're getting more frequent. So to give a little bit of background, my whole life I've been sensitive to supernatural events. I have experienced a lot of unexplainable things, and I always do my best to find a plausible/logical reason for things happening, and about half the time I do. My aunt recognized my sensitivity and taught me how to hone in on clairaudience and clairvoyance when I was a kid to help me be able to decipher these situations as well. Believe what you will, I'm confident in my abilities and experiences. So fast forward to this past month. Event number 1, I was home alone with my baby. No dogs, she had passed a couple days before, or other people or other pets. Just me and my tiny human. I live in a home with 2 levels, and I was in the bedroom in the basement finishing changing my kid's diaper when all of a sudden I heard people talking loudly upstairs. I rushed up and discovered my TV turned on and opened a streaming app I never use. Neither I nor the baby could have accidentally bumped the remote, which was sitting upstairs on the kitchen island. Event number 2, my dad was visiting from out of state to help my brother move, and he brought the travel water flosser that he had sitting on the bathroom counter. While my brother was brushing his teeth, my dad's water flosser turned itself on and shot a little bit of water out at my brother. This could be explained by a short from water getting into where it ought not to be getting into. So this event has a potential non-paranormal reason, but it's still weird. Nothing else happened during the visit. Event number 3, my mom was visiting the next week for the holidays and stayed in my guest room. One night she felt a presence around 3:30 to 4 a.m. She sat up in bed, and the ceiling light turned on. This light activating unexpectedly in the middle of the night has occurred previously, and I had attributed it to irregular wiring within my residence until now. Event number 4, today I was reorganizing my pantry while my baby was napping. The light above me in the hallway flickered, I felt something brush past behind, and then the kid's push walker that I had turned off after the baby went down for a nap started making sounds. It has a little fake phone on it, and it will ring and say, "Hello? Hello?" That was the sound it made, and I went to check it immediately. It was still turned off. Later that evening, I performed a smudging with Palo Santo to clear the space, and at the end, I instructed that if anything remaining in the room urgently needed to communicate with me, it should change the channel on my TV to signal that I needed to engage in proper communication. My smudge went cold, and my TV turned off. The remote was on the counter behind me, and I was holding my baby. If just 1 or 2 of these events occurred, I normally wouldn't be concerned, but they are happening more frequently and also affecting my visitors. I even had an HVAC person check my house for code 2 leaks yesterday to ensure my guests and I are safe from mild poisoning and hallucinations, and no leaks were found. All of my detectors I already have installed for it are functioning properly too. I plan on inspecting my house further for a reasonable explanation, and then I'll try to fully communicate with whatever tomorrow when I have a couple hours alone. Unexplainable experiences in the hospital. It happened nearly a year ago, at a time that was the happiest time of my life. The birth of my twin daughters was also a time that still gives me chills just thinking about it. It's probably best to explain everything from the beginning. So gratefully, before COVID really took a grasp on England, I was thankfully allowed to stay with my new family in the hospital for the length of time we were there. As expected, my daughters were premature. They were delivered by an emergency C-section, which meant my girls and my partner had to stay in for a few days to ensure they were putting on weight and to ensure that my partner was recovering well. Before their birth, my partner was admitted to the hospital a couple of weeks earlier and placed in a private room. I wasn't allowed to stay at that time. While she was unpacking her bag, a little girl was eerily standing in her doorway. My partner saw her and, although a little apprehensive, said, "Hi." The little girl smiled and then ran off. This seemed pretty normal at first until she realized it was pretty late. It was about 10 p.m. My partner sent me a text message saying, "Who lets their kid roam around the hospital wards at this time?" However, she gave it the benefit of the doubt. This was just the first unexplainable encounter that started before I had even arrived. Fast forward a couple of weeks, to about 3 days after my girls were born, and I was getting ready for bed, again around 10:00 p.m.-ish, when my partner, shocked, suddenly said, "Hi again." As I turned around, the little girl smiled at my daughters and then quickly ran off again. My partner and I both came to a decision that the child must be staying with one of the other mothers in another room. I had my doubts about honesty, as I had been there 3 days and hadn't seen her once, but I ignored it as a lot had happened and I probably didn't pay much attention, but something felt a little off. I didn't say much to my partner, she had enough going on, as she received quite a bad infection, but I felt uneasy with eyes always on me, and I didn't feel right. A couple of days later, we had to move rooms within the same ward, as my girls were discharged, but my partner had to remain due to the infection. Oddly, it was the same room my partner had to stay in previously when she was admitted before she gave birth. That night was the strangest night of my life. We were both stressed, we both wanted to just take our girls and go home, but this infection was getting worse, and we prepared to stay in for the long haul. The night started off with my partner seeing the little girl again. However, I did not see her this time because I was in the kitchen area. My partner told me that something wasn't right with this little girl as she was staring blankly out of the window. Also, I didn't come across the girl at all as I came back from the kitchen area, which freaked me out when my partner said she had seen her again. Second, the privacy curtain we had drawn kept moving like there was a strong breeze coming through, only every now and again, not constantly, which in my eyes made it more unusual. I checked around, and no window was open, our room door was shut, and if you have ever visited that particular ward before, you know there is no draft coming from that corridor at all, as they need to keep the temperature relatively high. So my partner took some medication to help her with the pain, and she fell asleep, so I decided to go and have a shower and brush my teeth before going to sleep myself. Now please bear this in mind before I proceed to explain the next part. My partner had to lie flat on her back due to the pain caused by the infection. She could barely move and certainly not quickly. Anyway, my partner does sleep talk, and whilst I was brushing my teeth, I heard her murmur, "Yes, nurse, if you're sure," and a couple of other responses. I was a little freaked out, but no nurse had entered the room. Even if one had managed to sneak in, they would have had to walk past the open bathroom door, where I was listening for my girls, and I would have seen them pass by. I decided to ignore her and put it down to a mix of her medication and her sleep talking. I finished up in the bathroom and walked in to find that the previously closed privacy curtain was now wide open. The room was cold, and the most alarming thing was my partner was now lying on her side, completely tucked in. This might not seem unusual, but I had to help her sit up, and her flipping over without any commotion was simply not possible. Also, hospital beds are not quiet, you hear every movement. That's ignoring the fact that she was tucked in too. I immediately rushed over to her, attempted to wake her up, and asked how she had managed to get into that position. She sleepily replied, "The nurse did it." At this point I was completely confused but also concerned. What the hell was going on? Either way, I obviously stated that there was no nurse in the room and hadn't been for quite some time. After a couple of minutes of my partner trying to explain what the nurse was while trying to stay awake, she fully opened her eyes and angrily snapped at me, the one with the hat. At that point she had completely woken up, and you could see that it had dawned on her that what she had seen and interacted with wasn't a nurse of 2020. My partner described what she looked like, even little details like black marks on her apron, to what actually happened and what was discussed. This nurse had explained that the pain would be eased by lying on her side, but this actually caused the wound to be irritated and caused it to bleed due to her positioning. We were both pretty shaken up, as it was completely surreal. I called in an actual nurse and explained what had just happened, and she dismissed it, explaining it's probably the medication. I did speak to another nurse, and she didn't really want to say much but said she wasn't surprised. Although we were there for a couple of nights longer, I personally didn't experience anything else, but something to this very day doesn't sit right with me still. It's also worth mentioning my partner saw that little girl every night in the doorway and as she left the ward. I didn't know this until she told me a few weeks ago. She then went on to tell me about another girl she sees, not as pleasant as the one from the hospital, one who she's been seeing since she was a young teenager, but that's for another day. Strange noises, lights, and other phenomena have been observed. I have 3 unexplained stories that I just need to tell. Number 1, when I was around 8 or 9 or something, I woke up in the middle of the night to see what looked like pieces of light being reflected onto my shelves. At first I just thought that it was my mirror reflecting some weird light onto it, but it looked really bright. I went to stand up and look at it closer. I waved my hand in front of it, and you would think that the light would reflect onto my hand instead, but it didn't. When I put my hand completely over it, my skin turned red, like it usually does when you hold a light in your hand, and it started to feel kind of hot. I was freaked out, so I turned my lamp on, and it went away when I turned that on, but it came back when I turned my lamp off. So I stayed up reading for about 2 hours with my light on, kind of confused but not really creeped out. I decided I wanted to go to sleep, so I thought, I can probably manage to sleep with some weird lights on my shelves, whatever, right? When I turned my light off, they were gone. I have never found out what those were since then. Number 2, I was staying over at a friend's house for a sleepover with other friends. This happened when I was 12. Her house was pretty small but had a fairly large living room, so we all slept in there with the dog in the cage. This story has nothing to do with a dog, but you know. I was pretty pumped since I loved the sleeping part of a sleepover. I don't know why, don't attack me. I was always the first one to go to sleep, and I don't know if this is a curse or a blessing because that meant I would wake up first. This time I woke up at around maybe 1 in the morning to an extremely annoying and loud squeaking noise, like someone cleaning a bathtub really loudly. I tried to ignore the noise at first and go back to sleep, but it was so loud that I couldn't. So as always, I went to investigate. I went upstairs, and at first, I thought it was the dad snoring since it got considerably louder once I got upstairs. Their door was open, so I looked inside, and they were both sleeping. I know I was a creepy child, okay. Then I went to the bathroom, and it got so loud, I was cringing at the noise. I couldn't seem to stop it though, so I went back down the stairs and back into my bedsheets. I went on my phone and watched videos for an hour before it stopped finally. In the morning, one of my friends said that she saw me go upstairs at 1 a.m. I was so glad that someone else also heard the noises, but alas, when I said, "Weren't you so annoyed by that squeaking noise?" What noise? Number 3, this didn't happen to me but to my brother when he was maybe 13 or 14. This is how he told it. I woke up at night to find my door open and all my lights on. But because I was just really tired, I didn't notice it and just wanted to go back to sleep, so I closed the door and shut off the lights. In the morning, I asked Mom and Dad if they went in my room, but they said they hadn't. Pretty weird, but I could have sleepwalked, who knows? I don't know what else to do at this point. I've been experiencing weird things since as early as I can remember. It seems like it might have all started with night terrors. I still have crazy vivid recurring nightmares to this very day. My dad's family has kind of a history of being sensitive, so it's always oddly kind of just been a pretty normal thing for me. I've never encountered anything violent or overwhelmingly threatening or anything like that, although sometimes I get what I call bad vibes for no reason. For example, one visitor in specific has been sitting on the edge of my bed from time to time since I was around 3 years oldish. You can tell because you can always feel the pressure of someone sitting down, if that makes sense, and various beds have made sounds over the years. He doesn't sit for very long, and oftentimes his receding footsteps mark his exit. My husband is also a more sensitive person and has a similar family history on his dad's side. We live in a small house built sometime in the 1930s, I believe, and we have 2 dogs, and it's just the 4 of us here most of the time. When we first moved into our house over a decade ago, and it was the 2 of us together, the strange events started to escalate. It started with feeling like someone was watching you from dark corners and doorways and progressed to footsteps walking around all over and low talking, cabinet doors opening and lights turning off and on in empty rooms where there's only one switch to control said light, knocking and bumps and thumps and scratching. We hear a cat growling sometimes, but we don't have a cat. Our dogs freak out and act weird, doors that were locked are being unlocked, and things are moving with no possible explanation, even seeing shadow figures and what we can only think to describe as a ghost dog. Hubby and I have both seen it on multiple occasions since Christmas 2020. It's about the size of our small dogs except it floats about a foot off the ground, it's very fast, and as soon as it's been noticed, it darts off, and so very much more. I could go on and on. The activity does die down for long periods of time sometimes but then comes back. The activity will ramp up for a while and then mostly stop again. My husband loudly proclaims the name of Jesus and tells it to leave because it's not welcome here. It seems to work for a while, but it always comes back. When it starts to get serious, I call an old family friend/pastor and have her pray with me. A few weeks ago we had something jump out of a basket on a shelf in our bathroom and fly across the room, a bottle of peroxide turned over by itself, more unexplained sounds and footsteps, etc. I have become accustomed to all of that by now, we mostly just ignore it at this point. But then last night something different happened, something that made me very upset. Firstly, it's important for you to understand that my dog holds a special place in my heart. She seemed totally fine and normal when I put her in her crate for bed last night. I went on to bed and had just laid down when she let out a quick shrill scream, specifically her pain scream. Hubby got up to check and came back saying she was staring oddly into the corner of the room but otherwise seemed fine. Literally, like 30 seconds later, she let out 2 more screams, and that's when I knew something was wrong and bolted to her. When I got her out, she jumped into my arms and was shaking all over. Her little neck mohawk she gets when she's upset was in full force, and she was growling and showing her teeth. She had peed on herself and her crate mat a little, which she never does, and she was still focused on that same corner. She acted frustrated and scared to death at the same time. I took her back to bed with us. At this point I was honestly fearing something had tried to hurt her, and she refused to settle. She sat up on the bed staring at the doorway and lightly growling with her hair still standing up. I finally got her under the blanket and lay down after about half an hour. She's acting completely normal today. I've never seen her like that before, and I've had her for years. If something means to do one of us harm, I know that it has progressed to the point of too far. I would rather not be scared to take my eyes off of my dog because I can't be with her constantly. Let me also say that we most definitely believe in the existence of things like demons. We would love to hear your thoughts on how to get rid of this entity, or if you have similar stories to share, as it would help us feel less alone. Can someone explain what's happening to me? Is it a doppelganger? Am I blacking out? Do I have multiple personalities? Okay, buckle up, because I have so many theories and thoughts, but it ultimately leads to more questions. I've spent most of my adult life in Maryland and Colorado. This past summer, I stopped working and began walking my dogs every morning. I would take my dogs out early, as I used to get up at 5 a.m. for my job, and the summers in Maryland can get hot fast, plus the humidity makes for early morning walks. The first time I heard of my doppelganger was about 2 months into summer, so early to mid-July. My dogs and I would stop at the local bank downtown at least once a week so they could get treats. I would stand and talk to the people who worked at the bank for a bit each time, just about nonchalant things like the weather or what we were doing that weekend. I was sick this summer and did not watch the dogs for a little over a week. When I came back to walk the dogs, we stopped by the bank. When I walked into the bank, the manager said to me that he was glad I came in, especially because he was concerned I was upset with him. I was immediately confused, and it showed on my face, because he quickly started to explain that he was referring to when he ran into me the previous week. He had said he was working at an event in our town, and that when I walked up to get ice cream from him, he tried to talk to me, and I acted like I didn't know who he was. He said he was concerned because he thought that I might be mad at him, but he couldn't figure out what he could have done. I told him that I had not been to that event in over 2 years, and that it wasn't me, and I am not mad at him, nor had I been mad at him. He looked at me like I was crazy and had 3 heads and told me that it was okay if my boyfriend was jealous and I was embarrassed, but not to act like it wasn't me. I honestly didn't know this man well enough, but at the same time I could tell he genuinely thought I was lying to him. I promised him it wasn't me and that I had been sick, and he just kept shaking his head in disbelief and said that she even had the same tattoos on her legs as me. I let that go. About a week later, I met a friend for coffee, and afterwards I decided to stop by one of my favorite stores. I know the owner of the store pretty well, and I know the manager of the store very well. I went in, and the owner was working, and she looked up and looked surprised, and she said, "Oh, back so soon?" And I thought she was making a joke because I hadn't been in a while, and I usually stopped by at least once a week. So I apologized for not being in a while, and she cut me off and told me she was joking because I had just left like 20 minutes prior. I shook my head and told her that I didn't, and she told me to stop being funny, and then she looked at what I was wearing. And she asked me if I had gone home and changed. I told her that I had not and that I had actually been to coffee with a mutual friend, and I had not been in the store at all that day. The owner looked like she had seen a ghost. She swore it was me and said she even bought my size and my style. I asked if she had a credit card receipt, and she said she didn't, that she had cash, and it was weird because I never use cash. She didn't have video footage. So at this point, I am thinking that when I moved to Colorado in 2013, another girl named Ashley, who has tattoos, moved into Frederick, and we must look alike and favor one another. That was until I was on a walk with my boyfriend's daughter. If she had not been with me, and I did not have a witness, I wouldn't believe this story. I swear to you, it is 100% the truth. So about a month after the bank and shopping episode, my boyfriend's daughter, 23, and I were walking my dogs one morning. We started to come upon a couple, a female in her 50s or 60s with a male counterpart in his 60s. I noticed that the gentleman was staring at me as if attempting to identify me, but when he glanced down at one of my dogs, a sudden realization dawned on me. He became visibly emotional and greeted my dog. He said hello to her by her first name. My female dog, Charlotte, who goes by Charlie, is an almost 3-year-old Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. She is also a runt. My other dog, Flynn, is a Jack Russell Terrier mix, and he is 85% blind, and he just turned 10 years old. All of this is important. Charlie is obsessed with people. She will go to any person if they look her way, and she will let them pet her as long as they want, but when this man tried to approach her, she backed up. It was so out of character for her that my boyfriend's daughter and I both gave each other a quizzical look. This man bends down more and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, Charlotte. Do you not like being called Charlie anymore?" So now, of course, I'm thinking this man has to know us. Maybe I met him walking the dogs one day, And I told him her full name, because it's not on her tag. Charlie is, but Charlotte isn't. So long story long, I basically apologized to the man, but I can't place who he is, and I am embarrassed, but if he could remind me of how we know one another, I would appreciate it. And so then he steps back and immediately apologizes and says, "I'm so sorry, but isn't your name Ashley?" To which I tell him it is because it is. And then he says to me, "And this is Charlie, who you call Charlotte after a lady in a show that had the same kind because both of you couldn't have children. Right? That Ashley?" The man was looking at me with desperation, so I glanced over at his female counterpart and noticed that she was unhappy with this interaction and very curious about how we knew each other. The thing is, that is exactly why my dog is named Charlotte. But I don't tell that to anyone. There are very few people that know why her name is Charlotte, and it is not something I would ever tell a stranger. So I am literally standing there with my mouth hanging open, as is my boyfriend's daughter, and I'm shaking my head yes in agreement, but I cannot place this man for the life of me. He is seeing the confusion as well. So he continues giving me facts about this girl that he thinks is me. He tells me that we met at the same event that the banker saw me at, except that we met there years ago. At this point, I do not know what he means by years, but I had not been to that event in over 2 years at this point. I tell him I have not been to that place in that long, and that's when he says to me, "Oh, I know it's been a while, it was back when you lived at the house by the Maryland School for the Deaf. Do you still live over there? Now, if you do not live in our downtown area but rather in the suburbs, you may divide downtown and lump my house in with that area." So I say, "I mean, sort of, but more toward the elementary school." He interrupts me to say, "I'm sorry, no, I mean the large Victorian homes located across from the Maryland School for the Deaf. You lived there back in 2017 when we first met." Here is the problem, I did not live in Maryland in 2017. I didn't even live on the East Coast in 2017. I lived in Colorado in 2017. Also, Charlie was not alive in 2017. He also had no idea who Flynn was. He asked if he was a new dog. This happened a few months ago, and I am remembering a few details as I'm telling the story, so it's easier than trying to go back and add them in. It would be inauthentic if I did that. When I finally could explain those details to him, he looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. He apologized and described it as the most bizarre coincidence he had ever encountered. And then he joked, as they always do, "Well, you've got one hell of a doppelganger/twin out there with your name." My current working theory is that I am living in a different timeline, where I never moved back to Colorado and instead stayed in the DC area, resulting in a slightly accelerated version of my life since I didn't have to return and rebuild. If that is the case, do I go and look for myself? And if I do, and I happen to discover myself, do I approach her?